Honk. Honk it is. What's up, everybody? Welcome, Arvanauts. Welcome to a Tuesday stream. This is our first Tuesday stream in July. It is July 5th, 2022. It's 12:30 p.m. Eastern, and I hope everyone is doing well and is looking forward to a little bit of a surprise stream today. Not surprised because I'm doing it, but surprised because of what we're actually doing. It is a Lone Wolf adventure game preparation stream, mostly talking a little bit about the world that's being constructed and working within that world, and doing so because next Monday we have got a bag of giving session with a group of people that are going to be here for Lone Wolf and doing things for Sommerlund with the Cubicle 7 Lone Wolf adventure game system. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. We were supposed to do Adventures of Middle-earth today, but it had to be canceled because of schedule conflicts. They will be back at the end of the month, but we are here with this. And so I hope you are looking forward to that as much as I am. I'm also joined by a special guest whom I will introduce in just a moment. But before I get there, just a couple of reminders about ways to support us and the most important thing that I've got going on right now. First of all, on the channel level, of course, supporting us by following the channel is always appreciated. Checking out our YouTube and subscribing to us over there with !ArvTube is always appreciated. Checking out our Discord, !ArvCord, that's appreciated, as is following me on Twitter, !ArvTweets. And I'm going to need to put this in here, even though I still feel weird saying it, but you can follow me on TikTok too, at @Arvin_Eleron. I'm getting likes and people are starting to pay attention to it and go over there, and that's great and a little odd to me, but hey, I'm here, I'm still doing it. It's good. We're making it happen. So I am excited to be able to bring in something new to the social media group. So if you happen to have a TikTok account, please feel free to follow me over there. Website for that is arvineleron.com. Financially, !ArvCord for my merchandise area, not ArvCord, !ArvShop, !ArvTreon for my Patreon, which of course supports the channel, and I really appreciate all those who are able to support those ways. But I do want to say that I have not been focusing too much on that over the last few weeks because of what I'm about to talk about in just a moment. On the publishing side, !Icarus for my Icarus graphic novel from the award-winning Athos Arts, !Library for my Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, my 5e adventure and sourcebook from Alligator Alley Entertainment, and of course, !Grayshade KS. More about that in just a minute. !BLM, Black Lives Matter, very important to affirm and assert the significance and importance of Black lives. !Help Now, the World Health Organization page on suicide prevention, and very important to reach out to others when you need help and to reach out to others when they need help as well. And !Ukraine, UKRAINE, which is, of course, to support the people of Ukraine who are fighting back against an illegal and illegitimate and devastating war. They are fighting back against it, and this is our way, in a small way, to be able to support them by jumping forward. The big thing I want to mention, though, in terms of support of this channel, of course, is the Grayshade Kickstarter. We are now about 11 days out. I know it says 10 days, but it's really 10 days and like 16 hours or something. So it's actually really 11 days out, and we are currently sitting at 13,229 with 156 backers. That is a very good, robust number, but we are, of course, trying to get to 25,000 funding, which means we have a long way to go, and we are in that middle period where where pledges and backing and all that stuff is always a little bit lower, because you get a lot at the beginning and then it levels out in the middle and then it comes back up at the end. But we need a lot, people to jump on board and support to the extent that they can. We've got a bunch of events coming up. We have announcements coming up of various kinds. We also have Trendane's special audio session, which he's going to do at the end of the week, in which he will be recording. First of all, he'll be playing some of his Grayshade audiobook recording, and he'll be commenting on it. Think of it as a kind of director's cut, behind the scenes director's commentary on the process of audiobook work. And then he's going to be live recording in front of all of you the group of some pages from the Gray Shade audiobook as well. So that's going to be really awesome. I'm excited about that. And then, of course, we've got over the weekend D&D with Infinity and Beyond, but we've got that going on. So we have a lot of special events happening with this and also incentives. I've got another incentive I'm going to talk about this evening or today as well. But we really need support from folks if you haven't done so already. Many of you, of course, have already pledged to support the Kickstarter. And if so, thank you so much for doing that. And you have done, yeoman work. And thank you so much for doing that and for spreading the word. If you haven't yet and you're like, well, I don't know, I'm thinking about it. If you're thinking about it, please think about it and please do it now if you can, because backing now really helps out. And again, if for some reason it did not fund, we are confident that it will. But if for some reason it did not fund, you don't lose the money. You're not out anything. You only get charged if the project funds. And if the project funds, then you're going to get all this cool stuff that you were pledging for in the first place. So really would appreciate it if people can jump on board. Don't forget also that the audiobook I previously mentioned is now part of the core funding goal. So when the campaign funds, that means when the project funds, that means the audiobook will be funded as well. And you can, if you've already pledged, do a $10 add-on to get that to get Trend's audiobook as part of whatever pledge level you supported too. So please jump on board. Please spread the word. Let people know in any source that you can. That would be much appreciated. But today what we've got going on here is a special world building / character development stream. And so I'm going to unmute myself. For a change, I don't have to do my usual thing about interrupting because I only have one person here that I have to worry about. And I'm pretty sure I didn't interrupt him. And I'm going to unmute him now. And then I'm going to head over to reveal, as I have my new Stream Deck set up. There we go. To reveal this. Now, I have to say, I will apologize up front that you will note just before I introduce this awesome person that I have a generic Dungeons and Dragons overlay up here. This is because I don't yet have. I thought about doing the Bag of Giving overlay, and maybe I'll put that still in the background to do that. But I wanted to make sure I had something that looked good otherwise, and you can see us sort of clearly laid out. So since I've been doing all of this work to prepare and set things up, I wanted to make sure that it looked good in terms of myself and my guest host today. But that said, I'll do what I can to cover over the dreaded Dungeons and Dragons, because this is for Sommerlund. This is not for. This is for the Kai and so on. That's what this is for. But I am joined, of course, by my very dear friend Michael R. Underwood, who you can see below me in the column, who has seen a previous version of Gray Shade and so knows from what we speak, but also is celebrating a release himself. So, Mike, first of all, thank you for joining me and coming on board to help out with some Lone Wolf shenanigans over the next couple of hours. And how are you? And tell people about the re-release, man, about this awesome re-release thing.
Yeah, so it's it's always good to be here and hang out and chat with folks, on the stream myself rather than like in chat. Though of course I'm here for speculate things as well. Brandon and I had such a great time on Friday night doing world building for Valor that I think we may have inspired Arv a bit, maybe just potentially, maybe just a bit. But yeah, This summer, I've been re-releasing my debut urban fantasy series, which is Geeky Urban Fantasies, where fandom is a magic system. So the first book, Geekomancy, came out last month. And then as of today, I don't have my finals, so here's a proof copy. This is Celebromancy, which is the second novel in the series. And these are really fun because they're old enough now that I can clearly tell how different of a person and a writer I was at that time versus who I am now. And it is fun to be able to see that progression. And for anybody who has been taking the last couple of weeks or a few months events hard, as many of us have, the series may offer some respite because it's mostly light and fluffy. Or for folks who are who prefer to, like, when things are scary, to stare straight at the darkness and then pull a blade, then those folks should go and buy Gray Shade and back the Gray Shade Kickstarter.
Or both. Like I feel like these things work together. You can go from light and fluffy to grim but still hopeful and fluffy or something. I don't really know where I was going with that, but yes.
Yeah, well, it's because I think in scary times, different people and the same people at different times will want something that is more escapist in the Tolkienian. What do you say? Tolkienian?
I guess
Tolkien-esque?
Tolkienian would be, yeah, Tolkien, yeah, but Tolkienian I
The
like just because it
the
sounds good.
Tolkienian mode of escape, as in the escape of the prisoner, not the flight of the deserter.
Yeah. There you go. Ooh,
Then
that's a good
you
one.
want, you want the lighter stuff, and sometimes you want something that's going to like pump you up so that you can go and kick ass,
Right,
um,
exactly. So this gives you
even when
both
things
of
are
those
scary.
options.
Yeah, why not
um,
both? Both are good, as the Rising Tide says. Hello, the
yes,
Rising Tide. It's good
absolutely.
to see you.
They're both, those things are both good. And I'm about to show you my special. Okay, you ready for this? Oh, look at that. This is not a D&D generic thing. This is right here. What we have here is a lone wolf adventure game generic overlay. You can clearly see that on stream. That's what we've
Uh-huh.
got. It is
Well,
a, you know,
it's a complementary colors.
right.
We're mostly in the same color story
Yeah.
ish. Yeah.
This is completely, I think this is absolutely the way things operate. And
Pay no attention to the streamer behind the curtain.
yeah, exactly. The truth is I don't yet have my full, well, no, I mean, absolutely. I'm not even going to say the truth is nothing. You already know. This is all part of it. Okay, let me just get this one thing fixed here so I can make sure that it looks right. Okay. And
So,
there we go.
Greg, do
Now
you
we've
want
got it.
to
Perfect.
have a half an hour conversation about the development of religion in your region over the course of several hundred years, like Brandon and I did last Friday?
I know. I was watching. I managed to catch some of that, and then I watched some of the VOD the next day, and I was back channeling with I don't know if Garlic is here. I'm not sure if Garlic Tofu is in chat right at the moment. But with Garlic Tofu about this, and Garlic Tofu is like, you realize that these two brilliant people are just involved in this great world building thing while they're looking at the equivalent of a kindergarten's crayon drawing. And I'm like, it's very true. It's like the world building event is all based upon squiggle, squiggle, la, 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 la. I had this image of just like whatever the heck we were looking at, that whatever the heck that map was. But then, yeah, it led to all of this. Here's what's actually happening in deep details of the blah, blah, blah. It
Yeah,
was very funny.
I may try to pull out just a sheet of paper and some colored pens and redraw that into something that is closer to something that then I could hand to an actual cartographer and not have them like murder me with dagger eyes.
I do have this image of you doing this and then being like, you're like, yeah, this works, right? Like this is fine. This thing that you have in front of you.
People have been talking about things they want to see from actual play shows, and then Tanya DePass, who of course is a major force and voice in TTRPGs and inclusion and diversity in games, like, as she often does, like, gave an amazing rundown of like, here's how this really works in terms of talking about costs. And like, if you want a nice map for your game, you either need a cartographer on staff or you need to pay a cartographer.
Yep.
And a lot of actual play is really kind of DIY punk aesthetic. It is, don't care about the things that you can't make super professional, and then you do absolutely your best wherever it is that you have those skills,
right,
and you put your passion into it.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, jokes aside, like obviously the discussion was the important part, but it just kept cracking me because I'm just like, like the third squiggle from the left is where we really see some of the ontological imperatives represented by the blah. And you're like, really? But no, it was a fascinating discussion. And by the way, Tanya DePass is a member of the Gen Con Writers Symposium, and you will see her speaking about stuff in a few weeks when we are at Gen Con. So one quick note I'm going to make before we get into this chat: we will get a little bit of music going, and then we will move into a little bit of world building here. Part of the reason that it's great that Mike is on for this too is that this session that I'm about to start doing some preparatory work for is for next Monday's Bag of Giving session. I'm going to be running this for a group of incredibly gifted players, which include Kelly Robeson and Brandon Crilly, and which include Derek Kunskin and other people whose, as I'm frantically going through my windows, I don't remember, but I will look again. Lots of people, anyway, is the point. And so that's going to be happening. And of course, Mike is one half of the brain trust behind Bag of Giving, along with Brandon Crilly. So it seemed appropriate that we would have a chance to do this. So yeah, exactly. There you go, Garlic. Yeah, discussing neocolonialism over an angry kindergarten map. Yeah, it was an interesting juxtaposition. Quick thing though, before we get into this Lone Wolf prep session tonight, folks, or today, is because it is really important and because there are a lot of people involved who are relying on this. So we are going to try to put a couple of incentives up there for the Gray Shade Kickstarter. So I really today would like to be able to get past 13.5. We've had a couple of $100 come in already with a couple of extra backers, which is great. But I would really, by the end of the day today, be able to get to 13.5. That would really help us as we continue to push forward. So how do we do that, you ask? Well, I will let Mike speak for himself because Mike has made an offer to me privately, which I am happy to have him reveal publicly. But I have something which I'm going to add on to that. So before I do, Mike, very generous of you, by the way. What is it that you wanted to offer publicly based on our private discussion?
Yeah, I was thinking that I could offer some copies, ebook copies of Geekomancy, the first book. And this is the new edition, to anybody that backs in the next, do you want to say 24 hours?
Sure, that's fine.
If that works, works for you. So, and then I would say anybody that backs at maybe the full set, the $125 tier or higher, I will give you the 2 books that exist already, and then when they come out, I will send you ebooks of Attack the Geek and Hexomancy. So you would get all 4 of the books, 3 novels plus a novella in the series. So these retail for $5 each. The novella is $3. So theoretically, you're getting another $18 of value on your pledge.
Wow.
If you're pledging at the higher levels, if you're pledging at any of the other levels that are lovely, and they all kind of they'll set up backer kit if you're using backer kit, and they get you the updates and all that kind of good stuff. And like we said, at different times you want different things to be able to read. So that is that, and I hope that may entice some people who had maybe been going like, oh, well, I'll get around to it, to go ahead and pledge.
Get around now. Thank you, Mike, very much for doing that. That's very generous of you. So I will add on to that, what I will say too is, and I will make this the next 2 people. The next 2 people that are, if you are here, and or at me at Twitter, so either here or at me at Twitter, at Gregory A. Wilson on Twitter, during the time of this stream. So we're going to be running for about 2.5 hours-ish. So we'll be done at about 3:15 p.m. Eastern or so. So, did I do that right? 1:45, 2:45. Yes, I can do math. So 2.5 hours or so. If you back the first 2 people to back at that $125 level, which is the one that Mike just said, you'll get the full set of those books. I will also send you physical copies of Icarus and Jelinek, which is my award-winning graphic novel, and I'll sign them too. So I will send you a copy of those. Thank you. I think they are too. The art that I did on them was extensive. No, I was the writer going, look at the pretty pictures. That was me. But so I will send you a signed copy of Icarus and Jelinek, and I will give those to the first 2 backers. I'll ship them at my cost, unless you're, I don't know, in Upper Guam or something, in which case we'll have to talk about shipping costs, but I will otherwise ship it at my cost. And I'll do that for the next 2 backers who at me on Twitter. So you're going to get not only all of Mike's books, you'll also get my Icarus and Jelinek award-winning books from the award-winning Athos Hearts. So that's what we're going to do. So thank you, Mike, for that. Please let people know. Please spread the word, everybody. Please tell them that we're in here doing this stuff, because it would be really helpful, and I really want to keep these things moving forward. Thank you for putting that in Zoom. I was thinking the same thing, actually, Mike. Now we actually know what it is we just said we would do. Cool. All right. So let's get to it. And I want to start by talking a little bit about this thing. Okay, there we go. Now I have e-versions of this. This system that we're going to be using. Oh, wait, I did say a little bit of music. All right, since Mike is here, I'm going to allow Mike to tell me, do you have a game OST which you think might be suitable for some good background music in this?
Well, so I don't really know a lot about Lone Wolf. The vibes that I got from like the cover image were like the part of Lord of the Rings where Aragorn is known as Strider. Like, is that about on
That's
target?
similar, although there's a kind of the Kai are all monks, so there's kind of
Okay.
a monkish monastery type of thing, I guess I
Okay.
would say on top of it. Also, I just realized as I was talking that I actually do have the Lone Wolf soundtrack because there was a video game, a very underrated video game, which I played in this channel. So I think I answered my own question. Although
Okay.
later on, if we run out of music, then I'll ask you that same question again. But we're going to play a little bit of Joe Dever's Lone Wolf soundtrack. And if you look for this on YouTube, if you want to follow along with us at home, chat, you can find that. And we probably will not be the full length of time, but there we go. But yes, in answer to your question, there is a little bit of that Aragorn feel that I would say is a part of this. So let's talk a little bit about Sommerland. And actually, this will be a good chance for us to talk, too, about taking a property that exists, like, as opposed to the joke about the angry kindergarten drawing. This is like literally you were having us build it on the fly. Yes, of course, Garlic. I would be interested in you adding a signed paperback of Night Ivy with a cool personal message if anyone backs to 500. And while we're on that subject, do you mean the just released Night Ivy, Garlic? Do you mean that from the award-winning EDE Bell? Is that the Night Ivy signed paperback that we're talking about? I want to make sure I'm clear that I'm not confusing it with the other non-award-winning signed copy of Night Ivy. So let me just make sure that
All of those impersonator EDE bells trying to ride on your coattails.
You do mean that. Okay, yeah. So, wow, that's amazing. Yes, if you could add that, Garlic, that would be great. Thank you very much for doing that. So, here we go. So, this, folks, is the Lone Wolf Adventure game. And the thing I want you to note about this is that this is a very good, like, unboxing scenario where when you're opening it up, it gives you the, read this first, open this up, and then you kind of have layers and layers and layers. But this was done by the amazing Cubicle 7, which for a while also did the Adventures of Middle-earth property, which I'm running on my channel. They also did the Doctor Who property. They've also managed other properties, including Warhammer. Sadly, Cubicle 7 has reduced a lot of their offerings so that they mostly now just do Warhammer-related stuff, which I personally think is a little unfortunate because I think it's really reduced their portfolio, basically, of games that they have to offer. And it means that some of these games are cut adrift. But when they were about to basically move away, no one has picked up the license, as far as I know, of Lone Wolf yet. And so I went and I bought everything that I could on Drive-Thru-RPG because I was like, I want this stuff. And the stuff that they have is just top notch. In fact, I'm going to show you the rest of it, but I want to show you one book and then we'll get into the world. This thing here. Yes. Okay, so feast your eyes at Warhammer, yes. Feast your eyes, chat, and Mike, on the quality level. Cubicle 7 has always produced good stuff. This is Bestiary of the Beyond, like
Nice.
super pro art.
Is that a dwarf in power armor?
No, that is actually a stone dwarf golem,
Okay.
is basically what that is.
Now I want dwarves in power armor.
Yeah, listen, who would not want dwarves in power armor? In fact, now that you mention it, I'm actually curious as to what the heck that is. What actually that is. Is it a Drondarin golem? Blah 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 blah. I think that's what that is. Did I get that right?
Right, because if
44.
anybody in like trad
Yes,
fantasy would make power armor, it would be dwarves. I think gnomes would make mechs.
There we go, right there. That is what that
Very
is. It is
cool.
called a Drondarin golem. And a Drondarin golem is a magically animated construct which looks like huge statue of dwarf carved from solid rock with stone parts joined together and articulated with iron links and rivets. Their eyes are cut glass lenses through which one can see fire burning inside, and it is this fire which is the magical power which animates them. They usually have one fist worked into the shape of a hammer and the other fashioned in the shape of a Boreas cannon. Using rune magic, the Drodoran dwarves of Bor have been able to craft magically animated constructs made of metal and stone to assist them in several ways. Different from golems crafted by other sorcerers, which are roughly shaped and animated masses of matter, dwarven constructs are very large, articulated stone servants. They use these rock leviathans to guard their temples and the main gates of their subterranean kingdoms. To be clear, these are not dwarf-sized. They are enormous, giant-sized dwarves that stand at the gates of dwarven kingdoms to prevent people from coming in. They use their Boris cannons as ranged weapons. They can fire with their Boris cannons up to a range of 300 feet. So these things are enormous, and they have become progressively rarer, but they are used to guard the gates of the Kingdom of Bor and some of its well-hidden treasure chambers. So it's super, super slick that they have. So anyway, so that's just an example. It's like the monster manual, right, or the equivalent of it. And then you look at some of the expanded character handbooks like this, Heroes of Magnamund, right? And these characters have a group of all sorts of different kinds of classes and characters that can be run, including archetypes. So let's say you wanted to be a Dwarven Gunner of Bor. Let's keep that Dwarven Gunner theme up going. Dwarves are willing to go on adventures, which give them a chance to practice their shooting skills. So they are capable of using a boar musket. They have coal, iron, burning embers, and bitter ash, which cling to every inch of a boar dwarf's skin. They are an honored class of soldier and usually trained from the time they are very young in the many practical arts of the Drodoran. They can forge their own equipment and load and fire anything from a boar musket to a cannon or bombard. So if you think of in Critical Role, the gunslinger, right. Pathfinder archetype that was brought over by Taliesin into the D&D thing, that's very much like this, except that they are much more like kind of heavy ranged weapons specialists and stuff like that. So
right, because I think isn't one of the alchemist subclasses that is like in official 5e now like more artillery based?
That's right.
Makes me think about that.
That's right, and it's very much in that that's right, it's very much in that range. There are also some other cool things that they have here, like bounty hunters, who are particularly good at tracking down people for money, and so their investigational skills are better and all that stuff. So very cool.
There's some really sharp writing in those descriptions, I think, especially for that kind of automaton.
Yes, I completely agree. I think the writing in general actually is quite good, but there's lots of really interesting stuff here. I don't want to keep the bone golem concept going, but there is, for example, what do we have here? Well, okay, I have to use this just because it's so weird. So this is a Corvagast, right, which is right there. Nope, sorry. Corvagast, okay? And the Corvagast... So the Corvagast is a large, rotund undead which resemble corpulent men made of boiling blood and burned iron plates. They are able to fold themselves up into a ball to form large spherical projectiles which are launched by specially designed siege catapults and trebuchets. They are essentially undead siege missiles originally created by the Nazdrananim. Launched from siege catapults and trebuchets like boulders, upon landing inside an enemy stronghold, they unfold themselves and wreak havoc within the enemy defender's ranks.
Well, that's terrifying.
Yeah, it's just like, what? So that's the kind of thing that comes up in Lone Wolf all the time, like this sort of weird, like, what the hell did you just say? Type of thing, which really fits within that world.
Yeah, because I think there's a challenge in like traditional or heroic fantasy where as a genre, it's so thoroughly trod that it can be really hard to stand out.
Yeah.
And not all products want to stand out. They want to give you that kind of expected vibe.
Comfort
but
food,
then the
right?
question is, how do you distinguish yourself if you are trying to be like line drive heroic fantasy?
Yep.
Well, you can do it with better description. You can do it with better execution of any sort. And so the writing here is really standing out. Like none of what's been described feels like it's way out of left field for the genre, but it feels like maybe instead they've gone deeper and like, okay, how can we make this all make sense internally and can interconnect and then kind of convey it in an interesting way.
That's right. So that basically is Summerland. So we should probably talk a little bit then about this particular thing that we're going to be doing, which is the Lone Wolf adventure game. Which one of the things about the creator of this of Lone Wolf, Joe Deaver, who I actually met some years ago at Gen Con, who passed away a couple of years ago, sadly, was that Joe was always very good about giving lots of different people. He sort of there was an OGL before there was an OGL, right? Like he let a lot of people use aspects of his world. In fact, there is all of his adventure game books, which came out sort of as a parallel along with the fighting fantasy game books back in the 80s. Those books were allowed to be translated using this very involved program called Seventh Sense. And Seventh Sense is basically just open source and are completely legal because they had his explicit written permission to do this, to actually use this to make these game books available. You can still get it to this day if you want to play through some of those things. And so there's a kind of nostalgia associated with it, but it always had a little bit of a different, I guess I would say, Eastern tinged flavor, although I don't want to state that too strongly because they also went in different directions in terms of some of the ways that they presented it. It's kind of an amalgam of some of the kind of disciplines and training of the sort of warrior monk stuff that you would see from especially Eastern tales and legends, but then also a combination of those and some more Western kind of standard straight ahead tropes, which are the ones that Mike was referring to before.
Okay.
So
yeah, wow. I found like a list of Lone Wolf stuff through that Seven Senses, including the two 1984 game books with like the totally rad. The cover art that I think of is more like 70s-ish.
Yeah.
Which is very cool.
Yeah.
I did not know this went all the way back to that.
Oh yeah, long time. And it always had this sort of like very strong and dedicated following. Partly because of the sort of unique aspect of how these things were presented. So let's talk a little bit about this particular world that we're talking about here, and the world of Summerland. And I want to pull up here the sort of basic details of this. So I'm going to use from the Lone Wolf adventure book something which only I, as the GM, sorry, that's not true. The other book I'm only supposed to use. This one, it actually encourages players to take a look at as well. So this is the Book of Kai Training that talks basically about some of the basic ideas of the world. So here is the sort of world as it's presented. So the characters in this game are Kai Lords. They are essentially exceptional warriors engaged in a monastic tradition that has long been established in Summerland. And there are a number of people who come, some from the noble families of Summerland, some who come from just anywhere, and literally almost like you would be a basketball player walking on to try to make a team just by trying out. More or less that's what happens with some people too, who just go to the monastery and are really badass and are accepted as a result. But there's a real Jedi flavor to this too, because they are inducted into the monastery usually when they're about 7 years old. They're placed into the charge of the Kai Masters, and in many ways this is the first lesson they learn, is the fact that they then must leave their families behind and devote themselves to this new order. And it's very important within the world that it's a decision that the child has to make for themselves. Now, you can make all kinds of arguments about how well a 7-year-old child could actually do that. That is a concern. But that's the same argument you'd have to make about the Jedi. The question is whether or not these people are allowed, and they're allowed to depart later on, and they can if they feel at some point that it's not training they want to do. Witcher overtones with this as well, by the way, in terms of how this stuff gets represented. And so a Kai Lord works and studies and trains and meditates. And they make their way basically ranking up very much in the sort of tradition of different ranks within a temple to become a higher and higher level and to gain more of these powers. And the Kai Order itself is built upon the inspirational teachings of the god Kai. The Kai Lords themselves, and I've always loved this, are devout followers of the sun god, but they refrain from proselytizing their beliefs. In fact, they are explicitly told that their job is not to be missionaries or preachers. Their job is to live out their faith themselves, and other people can make their decisions for themselves, but they are not to try to recruit anyone to the cause. It's up to them to do this. They take oaths to protect the poor and the downtrodden. They take oaths to sacrifice themselves when it is necessary. And they are designed to accept a life of meditation and discipline, and above all, self-improvement, as mind and body are brought together in total union. So the ideal Kai Lord is one who has perfected oneself in service to others. And so that's basically the idea. And there are 4 vows that are important as a part of this. Then I have a question for Mike on this. So the 4 vows are, and by the way, anyone who breaks these vows are called oath breakers. There are very few who have done it, but when they have, they are like vilified in the order, like almost to the point where they're almost held up as like, don't be like this person who was an oath breaker. So the 4 vows are basically this. One is the vow of fire. And it is, fire is the gift of the sun, the light that burns away all but the spirit and leaves behind only truth. During the years spent in training at the monastery, Kai Lords discover there is little need for material wealth, and that personal development is of far greater importance. And so a Kai Lord is only permitted to own material possessions that are deemed worthy and acceptable to his masters, which pertain directly to sustaining his personal well-being and maintaining the security of Summerland. All other possessions are considered distractions. I know this will not ring well with Mike at all, who is very pro-capitalist and thinks that acquisition is important. I'm joking very strongly for those listening at home. So that's the vow of fire. And the fire, usually the trial of fire, is a trial of sacrifice. A Kai initiate is requested to give up a sentimentally valuable keepsake from his or her childhood years, which is interesting. So you're supposed to give that up because of the sort of representing the next life that's there. So, vow of fire, the vow of light, which is that all choices bring the Kai Lord into conflict with the only foe he can never defeat, himself. Good choices shall ensure survival. Evil choices will demand a tragic end. I should say themselves, by the way, because male and female, non-binary, it doesn't matter. That they don't pay particularly attention to that. So it can be whoever in that role. So the Kai are expected to hold themselves to a higher standard than ordinary folk. A Kai Lord who knowingly and willingly commits a deliberately harmful act will be stripped of rank and will lose their ability to call upon their Kai disciplines until atonement is made for their transgression. So if they make a mistake that is sort of a clear evil decision at the moment, or a decision of cowardice to not protect someone, not only do they get their rank stripped from them until they atone, they lose actual power. Their power itself is stripped until they have atoned as a result. And usually what happens is during the trial, to sort of see if they're good enough to do this, the presiding Kai masters, I love how this also reminds me of my dissertation committee, poses a moral dilemma to the initiate, and together they judge these 3 masters according to the answer that they give. They are given 1 minute in which the person is allowed to consider and give their answer, and they only have 1 answer they can give. So you can't be like, wait, I meant to say this. Like, nope, you make the call and that's it. So that's equally important to that trial of fire I mentioned before. Last 2, vow of Solaris. Darkness cannot be tolerated. Where it obscures true sight, it must be banished by the light. Kai Lords must fight evil wherever and whenever it manifests itself. Vow ensures that an initiate is prepared, if necessary, to sacrifice their lives in order to bring about the defeat of the loathsome minions of the main bad guys in this, who are the Dark Lords of Helgedad. By the swearing of the Vow of Solaris, a Kai initiate obtains the moral authority needed to become a true Kai Lord, and it is the one that is most frequently tested in their future years. The initiate actually is given for the trial one of the monastery's rare treasures, which is a sun crystal, and they glow with an intensity of light. The initiate must carry the sun crystal into the deep shadows of the monastery's great hall. If the light that radiates from the artifact is sufficient to make the face of the initiate visible to the Kai masters, the trial is passed, and that gem is directly reflected of the heart and soul of the bearer's commitment. So it's you could say what you like, but only your heart truly knows. And the kind of gem represents this. And then lastly, the vow of spirit. Purity of body is purity of soul. For one to exist without the other would be like the glory of the sun existing without the beauty of the moon. So Kai Lords are expected to refrain from things like gluttony, eschew immoral behavior, and the Kai Lord, it's understood that they can't always uphold this if they're doing sort of secret agent mission type stuff, but a Kai Lord must generally choose moderation over excess. And the way this trial is done is before the actual day of the rest of the trials, the Kai Masters will engineer secretly 3 sets of circumstances in which they might indulge in dishonest behavior. These are not things that are going to be harmful to themselves and others, but they are reflective of a state of mind. And if one were to sort of be like, yeah, let's let it all hang out and sort of do the equivalent of the horrific bachelor party, you know what I mean, kind of trope before the actual moment of then that's going to be reflected by them. So 4 oaths, and what I like about this is that the game itself kind of leans into the idea that the characters really are committing to a particular set of ideals, and that those set of ideals mean something. And so this is not a game where you can be a murder hobo. Right. You're supposed to act in the way of the Jedi. So Jedi style initiate stuff. So
yeah,
Mike, I'm curious about that. If you wanted to weigh in a little bit about working with sort of, because it is narrow, it's intentionally narrow, and I'm wondering what you think about that from a world building, character building point of view.
Yeah, so like I don't know, probably 11 or 12 years ago at this point, I played a Inquisitor of Caden Kalen in Pathfinder, and Caden Kalen is like the party god, but he's also like a militantly anti-slavery god.
Yeah.
And like I've not really played a ton of D&D since, and haven't played like a paladin since. That's kind of like the biggest thing that I have as a touch point. I think there's a lot to be said about the Jedi Order, but that's for a Star Wars podcast rather than
from my point of view, the Jedi are evil now.
Right, as opposed to like a lone wolf world building thing.
Right.
So with these, I think having really narrow kind of options for the characters, and then saying, okay, here's what you have to live by, but it does require interpretation. Can give the players some role play stuff to hold on to. I think there are definitely times when providing more constraints is very productive for creativity, because it can focus you down. So that you go, okay, I have to keep these 3 or 4 things in mind, instead of I can do whatever it is that I want. And especially in like a one shot, having really clear theme and focus, or something like this, where the kind of the theme manifests in these oaths that the characters are supposed to take, that can be helpful. Do you expect or anticipate the material of the adventure, or this kind of the scenario, to be directly poking or prodding at one or more of those oaths?
I do. I think there will be several moments during this where what might be seen as the good course of action is going to be something that could theoretically come into conflict with those ideals. The way that the masters approach it, for the Kai Masters approach these things, is typically what they'll say to initiates is that you may believe that you have come across something in which there is a conflict with the ideals that you have, sworn oaths to uphold, but usually that is because you're not properly understanding the situation that faces you, or the nature of the ideal that you think is being tested. And I'm reminded a little bit here of Luke Skywalker's question. I'm going to be making lots of Star Wars references here, even though this is not a Star Wars podcast. But Luke Skywalker's question to Yoda, which is the dark side stronger? And Yoda says this in Empire, and Yoda says, no, quicker, easier, but not stronger. And I always thought that it was kind of a missed opportunity to Yoda, because he could have gone on to say, because the good side, the light side of the Force, is ultimately more lasting, more enduring, right? There's a reason that the Sith Lords, there's only ever 2 of them, and that they always change, because they're constantly like backstabbing each other. Like, relatively speaking, the Emperor Vader combo is one of the most stable Sith Lord combinations if you look at the history of it, because otherwise they're forever getting killed or getting over emotional and attacking them and thinking they're more powerful, and then the stronger shall rule and blah, blah, blah. That's constantly happening. and that leads to not a lot of stability. And so the strength of the sort of Jedi light side of the Force then is its consistency and the kind of almost mountain-like endurance that presents when confronted with sort of obstacles. So in this case, yes, there will be several moments where those ideals will be tested. And the question is, does the player at that moment, does the character at that moment decide, well, I have to cast aside, these rules because obviously they didn't account for this, that, or the other? Or is that a failure of vision, and that there is a way to fulfill the ideal while still upholding the good, while still doing what must be done, and by doing so, you don't take the easier, quicker, and potentially long-term worse decision based upon what you do. So the idea is not, I don't save this person because my oath tells me not to. It's, how do I save that person while upholding my oath? Because the long-term strategy of doing it means that you will save them, and you'll do it without causing all these other problems down the line. Obviously, I'm not going to reveal exactly what that's like, but that's going to happen, yes, on several occasions throughout this. So that's valuable. Also, I should say, by the way, I noticed what you said, you Christensen, earlier on up there, which is, I'll treasure my physical copy of the first book. Yeah, my first ever game book. I still have a couple of those copies as well, Christensen, so I love those things. And one thing I'll say, Big Tiger Man, about that is players who generally play good characters will be jumping into an evil campaign. I'm about to say a tip which is going to sound flip, and that is, don't do it. I mean, if you want to be playing a good character and you find yourself drawn to it, let me recommend you not get involved in an evil campaign if you don't know what you're getting into. Because honestly, there are going to be moral problems that pop up for you that you're going to have difficulty dealing with. The second less flip answer to that, and I don't know what Mike would say about this, but the second not flip answer is, it depends on how you're going to define evil. If the definition is to provide order and stability in a way that people outside of it would see as evil, but you internally believe is better to reduce suffering in the long term, then that's something. I would still argue, though, that that's not really an evil action in the end, and that a lot of people who are like, I'm not evil, I'm just declaring order with an iron fist, are really just kind of engaged in a dodge. So that would be what I would say. I don't know, Mike, you have any thoughts about that before we get back into Lone Wolf, about playing a good character in an evil, or being someone who typically plays good characters but in an evil campaign?
Yeah, like the thing that the ideas that I try to utilize when I'm writing villains, and kind of have tried to move toward villains, at least in some cases, who have understandable motivations, but then they pursue those motivations to terrible ends. Is like, okay, so in Annihilation Aria, I had somebody who's effectively like a Star Wars Imperial commander, in charge of a ship, doing bad things on behalf of an empire, but is if he were human, would be a family man, mm-hmm. and is marginalized within his own society and has a chip on his shoulder about proving himself. So, like, depending on the tone that you're going for, if you're not going for like mustache twirling evil, then I think it's going to be useful to think about their motivation, and then think about what are they willing to do or not do, and is the motivation evil? Is the method evil? Are the results evil? If all three of those are evil, it may be harder to sympathize with that person.
Yeah.
If only one of them is evil, then it may be much easier to sympathize, because you might have someone who has like bad motivations but achieves good things and and desires good things, and they're just like tragic. That's like more like a tragic villain. Or you get somebody who has good motivations and good goals and bad methods.
Right.
In like MCU stuff, I got very frustrated that there were kind of a run of characters who presented a IMO accurate critique of either the hero or the status quo, and then went on to do something totally loathsome, such that we, the viewer, could discard their their critique.
Yeah.
Because clearly they're a bad person.
Right, which means we lose the critique because the person themselves is a bad actor, right? And
right. Like that shows up in Black Panther, but that is mitigated by the fact that Nakia also makes a critique of kind of Wakandan foreign policy. And so T'Challa is caught between Nakia's critique and Killmonger's critique.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit more, like the dialectic is more effective and less bullshit in that compared to something like Falcon and Winter Soldier or like Spider-Man Homecoming, where Vulture has this anti-corporate critique.
Yes.
Except then he's a profiteer.
Yeah, and I saw your commentary. I believe you had made this commentary about Spider-Man Homecoming with the Vulture, and I like that. I like that analysis, and I want to further. I'm probably the only person who feels this way. I actually liked Falcon and the Winter Soldier. I understand there were aspects of it that were ham-handed, but I thought the moment of the new Captain America getting up with the shield dripping from blood at the end of that one episode was extraordinary. I can't remember the last time I saw something that is that sort of indicative and powerful of the limits to which America falls too often, right? Where it waves around its ideals and never gets to the reality of what it does, right? And especially in contrast with a Captain America who does not just rally around the flag, but who actually says, you are not living up to the ideals that have been established, and you have never lived up to those ideals, right? That's what makes that Captain America such a wonderful character for so many people, because they don't accept my country right or wrong. They're like, no. You need to make your country right. It's wrong, so you need to make it right. And this other guy just, oh man. So I actually liked that implicit critique of someone. And I feel like the show didn't bail on that early. I mean, the show was like, look, again, and I'm not saying it's perfect. I just, So.
The place where that show completely screwed up for me is with the Flag Smashers.
Yeah. I know. It was, yes.
Like
agreed.
that because that lead fits the arc that I described.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Versus the kind of the bad cap who, like, you can put that the kind of the second white Captain America up next to Homelander from The Boys, and they line up in a bunch of ways, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, this is America as the rest of the world sees America.
Right.
Like, America is a gun, a la that poem, right. America.
Yeah. No, you're right. And the Flag Smashers is very ham-handed completely. And
so, to fold back to this, how is this order seen in the broader setting? Like, do they wield a bunch of power and therefore everybody wants to be on their side, like in like prequel Star Wars? Are they like, is Kai worship like a minority religion within this region? Like, I feel like I have an idea of that order, but not as much of the broader setting.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So the answer to that question, first of all, the short answer to that question, and let me say hi, by the way, to the folks who jumped in. Good to see everybody. Hi, Rip and the Goon, and everybody. I will mention, by the way, while we're going, for those who are just joining, my Gray Shade Kickstarter is running right now, and also my good friend Mike, co-host for Speculate, and also the co-founder of the Bag of Giving charity series of events, which is what this thing that I'm preparing is going to be doing next Monday, have joined together. Mike has got a new re-release of Celebromancy, which is a book he's going to show right now. There it is. Look at that. So good, so good. So we've decided to combine these things slightly together. And Mike has generously offered a group of books, which is going to be given. So there's two things as a part of this. First of all, if you back the Gray Shade Kickstarter, which is running for another 11 days, this is my novel trilogy, the Gray Assassin trilogy that backs the last two books in that series, Renegade and Heretic. Also backs a 5th edition tabletop role-playing game set in that universe from Alligator Alley Entertainment. Renegade and Heretic are from Athos Arts, of course, the publisher. And we also have an audiobook from Trendane Sparks, the voice of Santiago Espinosa from Battletech, and also Battletech and Shadowrun audiobook narrator. So it's got that as well, plus a founder's coin from the accessory company Norse Foundries. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. So, what's up, Trent? What? So as a result of all this, as a result of these things, that is going on right now, and we are at 13,229. So what we want to do over the next hour and a half or so, 2 hours, as we're talking about this stuff, is we're running a couple of incentives for folks. If you back in the next 24 hours, so basically by 12:30 or so tomorrow, if I've got that right, Mike will send you a Geekomancy ebook. So you'll be able to see this awesome, the Re-Reyes series with Geekomancy. So that'll be an ebook sent to you. And if you back at the $125 level or up for the next couple of hours, Mike will add all 4 ebooks of the Re-Reyes series, because there's a novella as well, and we'll send all those to you, which is a very high value, and these are awesome books, and you should read them because Mike's an amazing writer. In addition to that, I will send the first 2 backers who at me at Twitter at the $125 level or more, I will, in addition to what you get from the Greyshade Kickstarter, send you signed copies of my Icarus and Jelinek award-winning graphic novels from Athos Arts at my cost, shipping to you. So I will do that to the first 2 backers, but only for the next couple hours. I really would like to get to 13.5 by the end of our time today. So please, 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 please back, support, pledge, let everybody know, because we really need everyone's help to push forward. So sorry, just want to make sure I got that out there. Also, I think... No, I hit the wrong button. No, go away, Outlook. I didn't want you. No, you were supposed to be the chosen one. All right. I was supposed to do this. I have the high ground. Okay, there we go. Yes, I have another person, which I'm going to bring into the mix for us to discuss and join. And that is someone who is probably feeling like he sees this channel in his sleep because there's just a lot of stuff going on. I'm so sorry. You didn't have to say yes, but I'm grateful. But of course, I'm talking about
But
the
I
amazing...
wanted to say yes.
Okay, well, as long as you wanted to say yes.
The triumvirate has assembled.
That's right. We have the triumvirate of Speculate Peoples. And by that, I also mean Brandon O'Brien, the Rising Ties, who has joined us, who I am currently... frantically capturing video windows to get in there. So, so yeah, exactly. That's what I am doing.
I apologize profusely for borking your overlay.
Oh no!
I had a feeling this would happen.
Yeah. No, it's fine. It's all good. I just got an investment I had been planning to make in a long time, a Stream Deck XL. So I just got the one with a bunch of buttons. And that meant that I've been spending time over the last couple of days basically redoing all my OBS stuff. I'm here to tell you folks, when you've spent 10 years streaming on a particular platform, it's like walking into a room, your clutter room that you've never actually... Oh my God, what past me was thinking about some of this stuff is absolutely beyond me. But yeah, that's what I've been doing. Okay, there we go. There is Brandon. Look at that. So it is
it's me.
the great Brandon O'Brien. I'm going to get a title here. Cue triumphant triumvirate theme. So Brandon, welcome. Thank you again for joining. I figured it would be good to reunite the group of you because clearly you and Mike haven't done enough world building talk as of late. So we needed to make sure that we got even more.
I'm very glad that this is a niche that Mike has suddenly filled. I'm very excited to see more of this content in the future. Also, around the time that Mike was talking about Black Panther, my Black Panther senses were tingling, and that's why I decided I needed to be here.
Absolutely. And yeah, that actually leads me to a question. Okay, let's get that down there. That leads me to a question for you because I'm curious, Brandon, if you know anything about or have done any work before with this that we're doing, specifically Lone Wolf stuff. Like, did you ever encounter it before or any of that sort of thing? In general terms, I guess.
Lone Wolf is actually very new to me. The things that I've been hearing you all discuss are actually very intriguing to me in particular because, the dichotomy between good versus evil is not new to RPGs.
No,
there's an entire, the D&D, good, neutral, evil thing has been a kind of compass for how we consider morality in RPGs for quite some time now.
Yep.
And I'm always kind of curious to see games that kind of radicalize that image, and I think that being very overt about performing a kind of public morality is a way to potentially complicate the ways in which we answer those questions, because it means that players have to actively be deliberate about what they consider good and how they perform that good in the world.
Yep.
Especially knowing that that's a limit on their capacity to act, and I think that that's actually really interesting. It does make play seem very difficult, but I'm very intrigued by how that difficulty actually affects players.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, it's important to recognize too that much of the work that's done to sort of, you know, confirm that the initiates who later on become Kai Lords and then try to work their way up to Kai Masters, a lot of the way that that's sort of confirmed is not only actions, which obviously stands for itself, but in addition to that, there's the explanation for the action. So like thinking through why one does what one does is a huge part of being a Kai Lord. So it's not just, see enemy, hit enemy, but it's very much like, why do you engage in the activity that you do? Like under what circumstances? It reminds me very much in Wizard of Earthsea, the incredible line that is said by, I want to say the Master Summoner, who basically says to Ged, as Ged is recovering after his encounter with the Shadow on the island of Roke, and he says to him, you believed, as I once did, that a wizard's power grows, and as he grows, they can do ever more things. But in fact, the opposite is true, that as the wizard becomes powerful, ever the things they can do become less and less, so that in the end, they do only what they must do. Because of the impact of that power, right? So that's why, the wizards are reflected, the good ones are reflected as not just like, shooting fireballs at each other like they're going out of style, but like allowing rain to pour on top of their heads rather than just pushing away the rain cloud, because no one knows if the rain cloud becomes a hurricane in the south of the archipelago, right? So very much thought about consequence consideration and being able to do that fairly quickly, because obviously if you're a Kai Lord and someone's in danger, you can't be like, wait, let me consult my book for an hour and I'll get back to you. Like they got to act, but that means they have to constantly be meditating on their moral code so they can be ready for these moments.
So this makes me think, it makes me wonder if someone has played Dogs in the Vineyard in the Lone Wolf setting, because Dogs in the Vineyard, like it feels like it has some thematic and content overlap, even if like the genre and a lot of the setting stuff is different, because the game of Dogs in the Vineyard that I played in like a short campaign back when I was in Oregon doing grad school, very much focused on the moral and ethical considerations of the main characters, and the party self-destructed when they reached a irreconcilable difference of opinion about what to do in one of these towns. And so like 2 of the 3 characters of the 3-person party were just dead at the end of that encounter, and the last one was seriously injured and then went on to go and do what he wanted. Like that's, there's a lot of stuff where that could be different, but I do see a little bit of that overlap. And I wonder to what degree the book or the materials talks about how Kai Lords reconcile their differences with each other. Like, it's like, do they have is there like a team leader? Like, is there RP guidance for Lords to kind of work through these issues?
Well, and that's a good question, and I'm going to come to that actually, because I wanted to mention, because you had asked about sort of the way that the larger society, Mike, looks at the Kai Order. So the answer to that is, so we are looking right now at a portion of Magnamund, and there is a section of that which also takes into place Sommerlund, which is a country within the continent, basically the world of Magnamund. And so when so long before the beginning of this, like 1,000 years before, there was a huge battle between basically evil and an alliance, a group of people that had basically fought each other most of the time until the big evil became more of an issue. So what happened was that essentially, I'm way oversimplifying, but the big bad, in the process of being defeated, also defeats the one unifying force that everyone was willing to listen to. And so as a result, and did so expressly by saying that by destroying this particular person, good would basically fall to fighting amongst itself, and the nations would fight, and so they would have gained nothing, even with the defeat of this evil. And so the way that they move around is that they are sort of sidestepped by having this god of the sun that gives one of the sort of people who's left over, one of these leaders, this vision. And it's he who actually builds the first monastery and begins to expose himself to physical detriment and to kind of wander in the wilderness type of thing, and like sort of like cone his body and mind to the point where he can then come back and sort of through the power of his own example set a new path forward. And so the monastery, in a way, with its emphasis on peaceful meditation, with its emphasis on exceptional combat training, but the benefit of their combat comes through the ability to be able to meditate. Like these things are inextricably linked. So that becomes essentially a clarion call to a peoples that are so sick of conflict. Like they are so tired of war and of warlords and of, so instead here is this, which is offering a new method of peace that involves self-reflection and meditative peace. And the Kai Lords, in the making of this monastery, as the original person who builds it, expressly says he's not constructing a private army to like go forward and like subjugate the people, which he could easily do, right? Instead, they go out of their way not to do that, and they simply establish themselves by an example. And so as civil war kind of like racks the rest of these nations, the monastery is continuing to kind of build up its power and attract more and more people. And eventually, the weary nations that have been fighting each other turn to the Kai Lords and are like, please help. Like we don't, we really, we need to stop. And so the Kai Lords begin to, at that point, welcome some more people into the group while still remaining independent. So the answer to your question, Mike, is that the nations basically of Magnamund, and in particular Sommerlund, where the Kai monastery is located, the nations of Magnamund are deeply respectful of the Kai Lord's ability in combat. There are some who fear that they are a kind of proselytizing order, even though they never actually proselytize, and it's like expressly forbidden in the tenets to go forth and like recruit people. They don't do that ever. And so but there are still some who believe that like by definition that's what they're doing simply through their existence. And so they are somewhat suspicious of the Kai Lords. And then the forces that would prefer for civil war to break out again because it's more profitable, or who would prefer for people to fall to battle themselves so that they can create a new empire. They are not fans of the Kai Lords, as you might expect, because the Kai Lords are this constant example of how not to do that. Born out of chaos, this is a group founded on order, but not, for the first time in Magnamund's history, order which tried to impose itself on anyone else. It was just order for themselves, like their own order, and people could join them or not. And so that's kind of the general view that people have of them. So Sommerlund often turns to the Kai Lords and are like, please help us with this problem or this issue. But the Kai Lords don't always do it. It depends on whether, like, if they're doing it because, please do this because of our border with blah nation, the Kai Lords are like, no. But if they say, we need you to save these 50 people that have been, stuck underneath this castle because a couple of vestiges of the Dark Lord's old armies are trying to hold them to siege, then the Kai Lords will go forth and do that. So that's kind of that's the answer to that. So in a way, the Kai Lords are always working, according to themselves, around the political structures, even though they are constantly being buffeted by it, because everyone would love to use the Kai Lords for their own purposes as a weapon. One of the things the Kai Lords have to do is not be used as political weapons by the state. That's part of their meditation, is to avoid that. So I don't know if that answers the question a little bit, but that's sort of the general approach that they take.
To give some context, or I guess I'll defer to Brandon, and then I have a suggestion.
I just have a brief thought, either like in the world building that already exists in the game, or as an element of world building that would be particularly interesting for this story in particular. The silliest idea just entered into my brain. The machinations of people with political power are always such that often they will make several steps ahead in the pursuit of a goal with the deliberate intention of goading other people into performing an action that will be beneficial for them.
Right.
Have the Kai Lords ever been fooled into doing a thing that they thought was noble or just, and then discovered that it actually helped someone achieve a cruel political goal?
Yeah, so the answer to that is no, but they have been fooled into leaving themselves open for attack. And in fact, one of the reason it's called Lone Wolf is that, because this takes place before a lot of the other Lone Wolf storyline takes place, much of the Kai monastery is wiped out because they are ambushed and basically betrayed by a group of people that had claimed they basically needed to consult with the Kai Lords about this, that, and the other, and for a variety of reasons I won't get into, they make it so that they're almost able to wipe out many of the people in the monastery. So they have allowed themselves to be fooled by... They never themselves get sucked into doing something bad for the benefit of someone else, certainly not on a group level, but they have been fooled into allowing people that claimed that they meant better to do bad things to them. And that may be because they don't get dirty enough on the regular, right? So when someone shows up that is obviously dirty, they sometimes have difficulty seeing it, is the way I would describe that. Also, there are, as I mentioned to Mike before you came on, Brandon, there are oath breakers, individuals who break one of the oaths. So there are, if you will, fallen, Kai Lords. These people are vilified and are cast out of the order and in fact lose some of their power as a result of this. But they still have incredible combat training that they haven't forgotten about when that happens, right? So those people sometimes do show up as like mercenary servants of other nations or, things like that, that have been picked up. And they are the worst of the villains in a way, even worse than the Dark Lords, the kind of primary enemy for the Kai Lords in some ways, because they fell after... because they should have known better, because the training failed with them, because their meditation failed with them. And the Kai Lords, I think, don't always respond to that well. Like, they're not very good sometimes at knowing what to do, like asking the question, why are there oath breakers, right? Like, so they're just like, oh, well, it's a bad apple. And yeah, there are very few bad apples, but why are there any bad apples? Like, why does that happen at all? And they generally don't ask those questions.
Sometimes the student is not what is at fault. Sometimes the teacher is what is at fault.
That's it.
Yeah, so I'm going to pitch this is probably a campaign scale idea, but who knows if this can be reduced down to a one shot. What if an Oathbreaker still had their powers?
Well, it would call a lot of the religion into question, but that's that's
appeared to have their powers.
Yeah.
Like, is there another god that could grant them similar powers? What if there is a schism? What if there's a more quote unquote worldly Kai Lord who is taking action when the Kai Lords wouldn't? We can kind of go back to our motivation thing. Like, if the Kai Lords were solicited to interfere in something, but then the Kai Lords decided not to do it, except one or some small number said, no, the master's judgment is wrong.
Yeah.
And went out to go and do something. If you have, a perfectly correct, objective divine system, that makes moral quandaries less interesting because who's right.
Right. Well, actually, that's a good call. First of all, there are other gods who could do that. Secondly, I could imagine a scenario where one could even sort of pretend to have those powers, even if they didn't actually have them. There's that too. But I would also say there is an argument to be made, because remember, one of the things I thought was interesting about this system is how you're often found that the thought is from people, well, see, this shows the weakness of the ideal rather than having looked at the ideal the wrong way. And I wonder whether there isn't an option for that too, where literally the god Kai could literally say something to the effect, could literally do something to the effect of, here are people that appear to have these powers. What will the rest of the folks do to do that, right? Will they fight fire with fire? Will they violate their own oaths so that they can break down what seems to be an imminent threat? Or will they find a third way? Because the Kai as a god is not represented as someone that's like, oh yeah, I just, for the hell of it, I just, drown a bunch of people every 3 days, just for the hell of it. Like, right? It's not whimsy. It's doing things for the purpose of, maybe Kai is asking why there are oath breakers more than his adherents are. And maybe that means that this comes up as an issue with that. I'm writing notes down about all this, by the way.
And because you could even go, you could go farther with this to the point where Kai actually agrees with this splinter faction, but part of the test they are being subjected to is, is your conviction so strong that you're going to go and do this against the kind of consensus of your order?
Yeah, right. And that's why, in a way, I've always thought even the title of this sort of, it's set up as you're a lone wolf, but you're a lone wolf that was raised to be communitarian, right? I mean, you were a lone wolf who was raised to be driven by communitarian ideals. Right. How do those things even tie together?
Presumably, all of the PCs are these Kais.
That's correct. Yeah, they're all Kais.
In practice, as a role-playing game, 4 lone wolves are not lone wolves.
Oh, no, of course. No, I know. Right, exactly. No, they are working as a
lone wolves.
As I said, this is not telling that story.
They're all Sigma males. Like
oh, God.
John Wick. It's totally bad.
Well, I could show you the character titles. It's Alpha Wolf, Beta Wolf. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's not.
It'd be 1 Alpha Wolf and 3 Sigma Wolves. And
3 Sigma Wolves. Done. That's a wolf pack. Yeah. No. Lone Wolf is just the book everyone's familiar with the title.
Yeah.
But
I get it. Branding is hard.
Yeah. But I get that. Actually, they do have pre-generated characters that we'll probably be using for ease of use for this one shot. Although down the line, there's a part of me that I have negative time to do this, but that would like to do a campaign at some point of this and would have everyone create them, with these things that we're talking about in mind as well. Yeah. So yeah, that would be part of it. That's kind of the general sense of the way these things operate. But I like that, and I'm going to take that note down about ways these things are part of it.
So I kind of very briefly wanted to pick everyone's brain on another thing, because snippets of the discussion that you all just had poked my atheist, always questioning the purpose and expression of faith question in my parts of my brain. I'm pretty sure Lone Wolf already has its own ontology to some degree. So the question I guess I need to ask first and foremost is, are there elements of metaphysics that come before or are more powerful than gods? Is it possible, for instance, that the idea of good and the idea of evil predates Kai? Or is not a thing that Kai actually interacts with?
No. That's true. Yes. Absolutely, it predates it. Yes.
Cool. Because then a very interesting thing comes about that also feeds into this question of whether Kai as a god is also personally invested in answering questions like these. Because it means then that theodicy,
Oh no.
We had theodicy and then freeze. Oh, man.
Evil itself has acted.
Exactly. You will not speak. Oh, man. Oh, wait, there we go. You're back.
I disappeared.
You were in the middle. It was
interesting
great, though.
thing was happening, wasn't it?
Right, right in your wind up about theodicy.
You're like, theodicy?
Wow.
And then you just froze.
I guess the universe didn't want me to ask that question. Haha. But what if the question and answer of the problem of evil is not a question that mortals have for gods, but a question that gods have for the nature of the universe itself. And Kai is constantly doing what seems to mortals like reckless stuff, because Kai's ultimate goal is he wants to create the best possible world for all of his adherents, and is constantly baffled by, well, why does evil exist? What can I do to mitigate evil as much as possible?
Yeah, I love this idea. I think the that we have often had with leaving aside, specific religious beliefs, but the fascination with gods and their interactions with mortals, right? The constant storytelling of immortals and mortals is that mortals are used as proxies for immortal decisions, right? Moral decisions and otherwise. Mortals fascinate immortals. They always have. What they do, how they live, why they choose to live the way they do, the things that they value. You would think that immortals who could do anything would be not particularly interested in creatures that can do far less. But nonetheless, immortals are constantly putting mortals through their paces. And again, not just out of whimsy. I wonder if part of what you're suggesting there, Brandon, is that this is an example of immortals doing this to get a sense themselves of, as you say, how to make the best possible universe. How should they exist in terms of the lives of good? Like, what lessons can be learned from the way that mortals conduct themselves when given a set of rules to follow, that the immortals may have to decide themselves? Because I thought what you were going to say is that rather than, mortal man speaking to gods, you then went on to say the gods speaking to the universe. I thought you were going to say gods learning from mortal men, or learning from the mortal races, and that ultimately, and I mean morally learning from them, that basically they are getting a chance to see how morality plays out in this kind of crucible of the world that they've created. So
I think ultimately they're the same thing. I think very much about the thing that I mentioned in the author's note to Can You Send My Tentacle, about the fact that gods think about mortals the way that humans think about ants. That there is this very inconsequential thing that I can destroy whenever I want, and it cannot even fathom the entire size of me or my intentions. But every once in a while, it can pick up something that is obviously several times greater than its own body weight. And that's kind of cool. And now I'm stuck here looking at it, expending all of this effort for a universe that it does not know is far bigger and unfathomable than it can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of cool? And I think that in this circumstance in particular, it's kind of interesting to tell the story of mortals who don't know, Kai Lords who don't know, that ultimately they are part of a simulation that Kai is running, because as a god, it has spent so much of its lifetime already understanding the premises of good and evil to the point where it is very easy, and then looking at mortals and going, but it's hard for them. What can I learn about good and evil that I didn't know before because I'm witnessing it being hard?
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe these mortals are smarter than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Pull back to Kai in a divine laboratory, and the world as depicted in Lone Wolf is just one of 300 worlds in a statistically significant divine scientific study that Kai presents to his colleagues in terms of these are my recent findings and what I think good is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It in a way that's true. It is kind of a lab experiment. I think one of the things that's interesting too is that because it's the fact that it's hard. It's the fact that it's difficult. It's the fact that these are decisions that must be struggled with. And the thing about looking down at an ant as a human is that it's very easy to just step on the ant, or to, brush the ant aside, and to, there's an anthill, you could just cover it over or kick it over. Does it really matter? Is it going to affect you morally and otherwise? Because, and the answer is not, it probably won't, although maybe it should. Maybe the fact that you don't consider the needs of others, even ants, is problematic. And the idea that you can then look at this and find that the ants themselves have some internal value, that they have value that they struggle in terms of what they think they should do, makes it less likely then that a god will just consider them the same way. They become more caring. There's a great episode of let me rephrase. It's not a great episode. I can't believe I said that. It's not a great episode, but I mean it's very provocative. I'll put it that way. So there is an episode called The Gamesters of Triskelian, which is from the original Star Trek, in which Kirk and a bunch of people are basically taken on this planet, and they are forced to fight in these arena games for the benefit of these intellects who have become so incredibly advanced that they are literally just brains in jars, basically. And all they have left to do is to just gamble with each other because nothing else is of interest to them anymore. So in the episode, I'm going to spoil it for you, sorry, what happened, it has been out for 50 years.
You can spoil an episode of TOS. I'm probably never going to watch TOS.
But in the what ends up happening in that is that Kirk basically gets them to gamble on something more than just the Quaaludes, whatever they call them, or the Quatludes, or whatever the heck the name of it is, not Quaaludes, Quatludes, that should have been Quaaludes, the Quatludes that they use with each other. And he gets them to gamble for something much more significant. But in a way, the better answer would have been to try to figure out a way to provide and understand empathy. How do you teach empathy? It is not an automatic skill for everyone. You're not necessarily born knowing that you will empathize with everybody else, although there are studies to suggest that as you grow older, there is a kind of natural move towards empathy which has to be resisted forcibly to get people to be angry at each other all the time. But having said that, empathy, how do you create empathy in creatures that wouldn't otherwise have it? That's part of the interesting thing about this to me, the idea of creating a kind of empathetic sense so that Kai then has to think about, how do I create a good world? It's not so easy. I can't just, be like, oh, go do this, and now there's no evil now, or whatever. Like, I have to really, this is really hard. This is a grind. This is a writer working on the middle part of the novel, right? That's the hard part. And so that's a big part of this, it seems to me, is giving people this sense that you can learn from the example of the Kai Lords. In fact, this whole book, this whole game, honestly, is about playing by example, in a way, about living by example, which I think is neat as a different item.
So with the discussion in the past in terms of like exploring some of the religion stuff and some of the setting and the politics stuff, where are you right now and what prep you have and what can we help you with? Right.
Thank you for focusing me on what we should be doing. So here's the question. So this is set in basically the present day, which is kind of complicated, but the year 5000 is basically the year 5000 of their particular mentioning of it. And the circumstances that exist right now is that there are there's no great army that is ready to conquer the peoples. Order seems to have triumphed over chaos. And the Somlending, or the people of Sommerland, where the Kai Monastery is located, have enjoyed this period of growth and prosperity. But there are many in Magnamund that warn that there are dark times coming, that there are treachery in distant lands, that other nations may be waiting, very similar to Eberron, where these countries are all sort of in an uneasy peace, where there is a sense that darkness is in ascendancy once again, and there are some nations which are becoming maybe even openly hostile. So it's in this moment of tension where there's technically overt peace, but we're right on the edge of maybe falling back into war. That's where this is set. So I guess the thing that I would like to ask about is, in this one shot that I'm going to be doing, how much do I foreground? I mean, I'll talk a little bit, obviously, about the way of the Kai, so to speak, and the Kai Lords and the Kai Monastery and all that. I'm going to spend a little time talking about that. But how much do I foreground the internal metaphysical stuff that we were just discussing, and how much instead do I backdrop that, or, sort of dial back the intensity of that discussion we just had, in favor of there is a specific adventure where they have to go forth. They are initiates. They are, sort of at the opening ranks, let's say, and they have to rescue some people who have been lost. And in the process of rescuing it are going to discover that there may be greater forces at work. So I guess the question is, how much do I play down the intensity of what we just talked about, or play it up for this adventure that we're doing? Because, I mean, yes, I want it to be entertaining, but if I just do a straight up, rescue fantasy, like, that's easy enough to do. But what I love about Lone Wolf is the fact there are these other moral considerations. So,
right. So we've been talking about Star Trek, and this makes me think like, oh, okay, which Star Trek are you using as your template? Because some Star Treks spend more time on the philosophy and the ethics, and some spend less time, and different shows spend their time in different like different fashions.
Where do you put Deep Space Nine in that?
I would say that Deep Space Nine has a higher action to philosophizing ratio, because they're able to put the philosophizing into the action maybe a bit more than something like Next Gen.
That's what I'm wondering about, because I'm wondering if that's the way to go, is to put the philosophizing into the action.
For a one shot, like I'm at the point with one shots where I basically plan for no more than 3 scenes.
Right. Yep.
Because the players are going to spend more time on things that I'm not necessarily expecting.
Yep.
I think that moral and ethical dimension is something that stands out to me about this game. So in either selling the game or pitching the game to the players, or kind of trying to present the game well, foregrounding that seems like a good idea.
Okay.
If we can get to the point of finding something that feels like it does a good job there of like presenting the moral quandary, where you go, okay, we can have a beat of investigation, a beat of some kind of action scene, and then they arrive at the crux of the moral quandary and have to act, and then see the results of that action. That feels like the scope that we're maybe thinking about. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, that makes sense to me, I think. And yeah, that might be a way to look at it, because and for this, if there's any one of my players who know that they're playing, I am going to charge you on your honor as future Kai Lords to mute the stream or get the hell out of the chat, because I'm about to. And for those who don't want to have anything spoiled, this is very early though, so there's not much of a spoiler for the viewers, but mostly for the players. One of the things that comes up as they are in the process of trying to figure out what happened to this missing caravan with people is there are explicit cues for me as the GM to be asking about what they think about why the caravan might be missing, and to discuss it with each other. And the premise behind that idea is whether or not there is, according to the player, a simple explanation, or is there something more sinister that might have befallen it. And the idea here is to look and see whether they think there's some more global, like, see, it means that Kai has pulled back from us and, whatever, or this is more like, no, like this is an independent problem, but our faith will carry us through, and, whatever. So that, that discussion comes up in the process of them going to do the thing that they're going to be asked to do. So that's definitely going to be something which is part of this mix as they're going to go forth and accomplish stuff. So yeah, so I mean, I guess that's what I would say. And I wrote down a bunch of notes, but I'm going to write some more. Brandon, what do you think about this? About how much you foreground is that the way to go? Like philosophy and action? They are warrior monks, I guess, but.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not sure. In my head, this sounds like a good way to qualify what is going on in my brain, but that's because I'm not necessarily neurotypical. So there is a YouTuber named Jill Bearup. If you've never seen any of her stuff, she's actually really rad. She like breaks down fight scenes in film and television for the most part. And one of the regular things that she reiterates in those breakdowns is good action's purpose is to foreground good story. That you should be able to watch a fight scene, for instance, and know each character's motivations and how the fight helps either articulate those motivations or articulate the debate between those two characters' warring intentions in a way where you don't need to talk very often for that to still be qualified. Mm-hmm. And I do think, like to Mike's credit, a lot of very good Star Trek, for instance, is very good when action is present at using that action to qualify its philosophy. So I think that would be particularly interesting to find ways where I mean, in a tabletop role-playing game, the particular challenge, of course, is characters need to players need to qualify their characters' motivations for the GM, or else the GM has to be psychic.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if you have that skill. If you do, more power to you. I think you should use your psychic abilities more often as a GM. But beyond that, I think that there will always be moments where a kind of dialogue is the only way to qualify those motivations.
Mm-hmm.
But once they've been qualified, giving players the opportunity to engage actively with those things as opposed to continuing talking, it's particularly valuable in an RPG, especially in a one-shot, because action is also how you fill time. So yes, I think something like that would be particularly interesting.
All right. Well, let me ask this then. As I mentioned, for sake of familiarity with the system and for a variety of other reasons, this first adventure is going to use a lot of these pre-generated characters, and they have their own sort of motivations. But the motivations of the characters, which of course the players can feel free to develop a different mindset of, the motivations of the players has a different sort of background establishment, which means that there can be, I could, but I don't have them play up those differences. So it gets back a little bit to what we talked about before about they have communitarian instincts, but the game, jokingly is called Lone Wolf because of that original game book that it started with. But I could lean into that a little bit. We have a character who comes from a noble house, and then I have a character, literally the next one, who was found when he tried to, as an orphan on the streets of this city, pickpocket a Kai Lord, and was found, and the Kai Lord, rather than turning him in or bringing him up for justice, brought him to the monastery to be trained because of things that he noted about him. Are those two people going to be, they're both Kai Lords, right? Are those the one who was poor and, was found and was brought up, and the noble one? There's another person who is a heritage is a mix of Somlending and Vasagonian, and Vasagonian is outside of Sommerlund, and so is basically has dual heritages. Do I play that up or not? So I guess my question is, how much do you think, both of you think, I should encourage the players to play up like individual disputes, and how much do I want to play up the communitarian, we all work together? I don't want them to descend into chaos, don't get me wrong. It's a one shot and I don't want to run a game like that anyway. But do I emphasize more of a sort of Stradian, we're all individuals and eventually we work our way towards becoming friends maybe? Or do I emphasize more of an Eberonian, we're all part of the same team and we're pulling together? Because you could technically push it either way, I think, with this. Also, hi to the Raiders. Thank you for being here. Welcome. We're talking Grey Shade Kickstarter, but we're also talking Lone Wolf, which I'm preparing right now with the help of my good friends and wonderful GMs and world builders, Michael R. Underwood, who has a book that you should get right now, re-released, called Celebrancy. And below, Brandon O'Brien, who has a book that was released not that long ago, which is amazing, called Can You Sign My Tentacle? And you should immediately get that and buy it also. Okay. So anyway, yeah, so what do you two think about that? About like playing up and I mean, some of it will be driven by what the players want to do, I recognize. I'm just wondering how much to like turn the knob to indicate that they could do something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a minor thought.
Okay.
Because as you say, a lot of this is qualified by a relationship to community and how one performs the act of caring about one's community. But everyone gets into community and therefore values community in different ways because of different traumas. Both of the characters that you just described, one of them sounds like someone who cares about community because they previously didn't have one, and has the potential to engage with a lot of the trauma of not being absolutely sure whether you maintain community through hopefulness and comfort or through fear, whether sometimes you have to force people to actually care about other people because people intrinsically do not. And the other
side note, this is exactly what this book does at multiple times. I'm just saying, chat. I swear to God, I didn't plan this. I
So-
didn't
Yeah,
prep it
of
with
course
Brandon.
not.
Arv, are you saying that you might have specific creative and aesthetic interests that serve as a through line through a lot of your work?
I don't know what you mean or why Aragorn is my favorite character in Lord of the Rings. What are you referring to?
Oh, God.
I don't understand what you mean. Yeah, there is a little bit of that. But no, it just, like, as you were talking, I'm like, well, crap, that's what
Yeah.
he's doing,
Yeah.
for a lot of it, for the reasons you said.
Yeah.
So something that I've tried to do as much as I can in one-shots is pick out some element of each character's deal and put in something specifically to grab that person's interest,
Right.
Like emotional investment or whatever, like getting character buy-in, ideally both character buy-in and player buy-in in a one-shot early,
Right.
can give you a lot of opportunities. Like when I was doing the Heart one-shot with the scientists this year, it was, okay, we've got one of these, and one of these. This is the hook for you. This is the hook for you. This is the hook for you. They're distributed throughout the adventure, and like we're going to set up how these characters know each other, and then boom, smash cut to action because of the time constraints. I would encourage you to think, what is a specific hook to each of those pre-gens that I can put into the adventure, and will that help pull at least the players through, because it'll give them some kind of emotional touch point.
That's a good call. I have already done that, and in fact, I sent already the players the choices of character so that they can decide which of these they want, and then I already have in my mind hooks set for all of them. And when I hear back from the players, these are the ones I want, I will further develop, more definitively that hook. So yeah, that's a great idea. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious as a result whether those character hooks all tie into that communitarian theme, because it means that you're not simply playing on them, you're giving them opportunities to play on each other, because all of those threads will inevitably clash in certain ways.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the reasons I gave them the group of, I think there were like 6 of these pre-gens to look at, and they're not just pre-gens like stats. I mean, they talk a little bit about, that sort of some of the basic details, but is I wanted them to also be able to see what the other characters they're going to be adventuring with are like, right? So they can have a sense of the whole makeup of the party, and that in turn may allow them to get a sense of what's sort of going to fit in one way or the other. So, because the other thing is that the other reason I'm asking this question is they are initiates. So in a way, they are determining for themselves how they are going to exist as Kylords, like how they're going to be monks under stress, like how they're going to be monks when the rubber hits the road, and any other cliche you can imagine, and how they're going to behave with each other. And so that's another thing that I was thinking about. Okay, so then I guess another question that I would have then that would be helpful, that is very useful. So as they are in the process of going through this, they also have there are a series of different moral choices and things like that they have available to them. I guess my question is, how much of and I know some answers to this myself, but I'm curious what you both think. How much of the world outside of the specific caravan they're sent to find and the various events that derive from that, how much should I reveal of the world beyond it? Because obviously in the end, I would love for them to be able to imagine the world as being this rich and developed, thing that they could explore in more detail. And certainly we would do that in a campaign setting. But again, in a one shot, you're trying to kind of zip through. So I guess the question is, how much information do I give separately, and how far the line do I follow it? I mean, these are all experienced players, but I can see a scenario where someone would be like, well, tell me more about the town of Stonefurrow and how that ties into XYZ or whatever. So just leaving aside just the question of just pure time constraint, how much of that do I open up for the perusal of the players in the process of doing this? Well, I won't tempt them, Tren, with something that isn't going to be there. But as you know, players can be pre-tempted with things that the GMs would not have expected.
Players like to tempt themselves.
Yeah, players
Sometimes
tempt
your
themselves,
entire play
exactly.
group decides to spend half of your 4-hour live stream session asking whether the chair in the room that they're in is particularly important.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever watched a game of Critical Role, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would probably suggest going a little deeper rather than a little wider.
Okay.
In terms of like knowing what was in this caravan, like what part of like the regional economic system does the caravan represent?
Right.
What are the interests that are invested in this caravan, so that you could, we're investigating like the attack on this caravan. If it's something like that, then the people who have the regional knowledge would say, well, you probably already know that the mountains that are nearby are a frequent haven for bandits because XYZ, and like that it's about having a clearer 360 sense of a small chunk of the world, rather than having and I'm going to switch metaphors, a low resolution view of a wider area.
Okay, that makes sense. So depth, not breadth. Yeah, and I think that makes sense to kind of dive down onto some of these. I mean, part of the reason I mentioned this too is because, as usual, the Bag of Giving group is a group of people who are themselves world builders. So I could see a scenario, right? We were talking before, Brandon, about how fun it was for me to watch many of us back channel. We're chatting about you and Mike having this like super brilliant discussion about world building while looking at a kindergarten drawing of like, this like color map. And so like, that's what awesome world builders do, right? So I can expect a scenario where I'll paint this picture and provide these ideas, but I can also see them being like, yes, but does the mayor of Boonwold care deeply about this caravan? You know what I mean? Like, and I can roll with the punches on that too, but I'm always interested to hear other GMs' thoughts about how they manage that in limited space. Maybe I give them the suggestion that if you open that door, there might be there if we had time to do so. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always value in the purpose of making your world seem rich and expansive, to let people know that there are people and communities who are invested in the thing that you're doing, without making those things matter. Like, there's a difference between letting someone know where the fruit that they're going to eat came from and directing them to go to the place where that fruit came from and eat the fruit there. I think that people like getting some manner of flavor, and it's just a matter of qualifying it in such a way that they know this might be important to my character, this may be important to the context of the struggle that we're presently facing, but it's not more important than the struggle. We're still here in this moment.
Okay, that seems reasonable. And it's funny, Triffid. The 4-hour Call of Cthulhu, 3 hours about what supplies and equipment to load onto the ship.
Right. Well, and that's like
one shot, huh?
An analog to spending 3 hours planning in Shadowrun, and then you don't get
5 minutes on the actual score.
Yeah, then
right?
you don't get to the thing because like everybody's tired. It's 2 a.m. on a Saturday night, and even as 17-year-olds, people are kind of dropping out.
Can I ask a question about that though? Because I think that ties into this particular thing and helping me with the Lone Wolf prep stuff. Is that, and I'm thinking about a story which I won't get into now, it takes too long, but is that paranoia that's driving that discussion, that the players in a way lack a level of trust, which certainly Call of Cthulhu would be all about, lack of trust. And as a consequence, they take so long because they're trying to dot every I and cross every T because they're afraid that they walk out the door and they get destroyed. Is any of that, is that a result of paranoia, and is that mitigated by the establishment of sort of kind of rules and structures that like the Kai Lords are not going to walk down the hill and immediately have like a rain of arrows at you because that's not going to happen because that's inviting destruction of whatever like that. That's not going to happen. Not to say that everything's fine and they can just run along. It's not a amusement park ride, but it's not a sense where they can't trust the world that they're in. I don't know what the two of you think about that, but like my experience with Cthulhu, which is Call of Cthulhu, which is just watching it once in a while, I've never played it myself, is that it's just so freaking paranoid all the time that everyone's like, well, is that an elder god? Well, does that person know secrets they're not supposed to? Like that sort of thing.
Well, I can only speak from the perspective of having played one game of Harlem Unbound, which I really enjoyed.
I saw some of that. That was great.
Yeah. That was a great campaign, wonderful GM. Well, a great one-shot with a wonderful GM and wonderful players. Kind of want to play Harlem Unbound only with them ever again. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that, because we didn't get to the end of that one-shot either, and a lot of that was obviously us going, well, this is what we know, but we don't know enough about what we know. Do we want to make a decision one way or the other?
Right.
And then we literally asked that question for 15 minutes until everybody died because we didn't want to make a decision that we thought was going to be hostile to our progress. Simultaneously, the very first half of that game was us just making a whole lot of decisions. My character doesn't learn until the end of that one shot that just walking into a room and shooting an artifact was the reason that we got into this problem in the first place. And I did that because I thought that I needed to break because some magic shit was happening in this room. I did what I thought my character would have done. And I think that a lot of the times that's the solution to the problem. When you inspire your players to just make the decision that their character would have done, even if that decision is the worst possible decision for the story, but perfectly reasonably the thing that they would do, that is often what drives a great deal of progress, because then that means that characters are responding to themselves and their environment, not to what we think is the end goal of the game.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a part or a thread of D&D history that involves the gotcha GM.
Yeah.
And I think that thread persists through a lot of what I would call 90s traditional role-playing games, kind of before story games, before the Forge, before other stuff that kind of broadened RPGs in some ways. But the most positive spin I could put on it is that for some people, trying to think about what they would need and trying to think through implications can be interesting and fulfilling. But like Triffity Matt says in the chat, Blades in the Dark lets you not have to do that.
Right.
You lose the satisfaction of, I thought about this ahead of time, unless you thought about it ahead of time and that you didn't need to say that you had it. And then when something comes up, you go, I already thought about this.
Right.
A lot of RPGs don't tell you can do that. Or they implicitly, if not explicitly, say you can't do that.
Yeah.
Whereas here's a secret, y'all. You can just put flashbacks in every RPG.
Absolutely. And they also apply an adversarial mechanic to the DM, player relationship, which is, I think, actively harmful. A game like Descent is designed to have an overlord playing against the players, but I think D&D does not actually work well in that adversarial relationship, and the fact that it isn't more explicit about being just flash it back, or whatever, so that they don't have to feel like, wait, I missed something, is a part of that. But then I'm curious though, because you both played in a Blades in the Dark game, very successful one on this channel, which ran way longer than a certain GM sitting in this call believed that it was going to at first.
Mm-hmm.
Largely
I wonder who that might have been.
Because a certain other group of players represented by someone else sitting in this call spent a lot of time talking about stuff you might not have expected. Now, I thought it was incredibly compelling stuff and it was great all the way through, but it definitely would not be what I would define as focused. You know what I mean? Like not in this sort of like, aha, you know, we know where we're getting to. So, and that's using Blades in the Dark, obviously. So was that just the player composition? And this is directly related to Lone Wolf because I'm thinking also about my players and about, you know, working them together. So what do you think, Brandon, from the GM perspective? Like,
so
it was awesome. I agree, Triffy.
I can't speak on that GM's behalf. I have no idea who that GM is. Sounds like a bad GM to me.
Yeah, I mean, well,
They're very
certainly
inventive.
not. So I think that this is a strength of mine. It doesn't work very well in streams, but I still very much value it, and especially with these strange friends, it's the thing I'm going to lean into a lot. I'm a very indulgent GM. If my players are making very interesting decisions, there's a point at which I go, I want to see where this goes. I'll just give you all enough rope because I'm very excited to see what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that comes to mind very clearly to my mind in the case of the Cindered Seal is actually the series of events that lead to of the Flame the Ash decapitating two assassins in the middle of the night. Because when I had made notes about although Booker confronting Ash at the shop and asking questions about whether Ash already had the seal, I just wanted that to lead into, okay, somebody was going to have to actively confront Booker at some point, or things will continue becoming more hostile.
Okay. And
then I just let things naturally become more hostile to the point where suddenly there are assassins coming to look for Ash. And Iori and Yoi, as Ash and Crossroads, immediately went, well, this is not ideal. We're just gonna not want anything to do with this. And the conflict following them just materialized into what I thought was very good dramatic energy, because everybody was playing it the way that they, in interesting ways that I wanted to continue paying forward. That's not good in a one-shot, obviously, unless you and your players have infinite time, which is not the case because you write for a living.
Yeah.
So I do think that in a one-shot in particular, there is a point at which you can't fulfill every narrative beat, which sucks in a one-shot in particular because a one-shot is often where you get some of the most interesting ideas. But that's something that you can pay off in a later game once everybody makes it. And I think that's like a particularly useful thing to keep in mind for one-shots in particular is, if we get to the end of this mission, then we can answer all of those other questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that means we need to get to the end of this mission first.
Yeah, I think for me,
Yeah, okay.
looking at the case of the Cindered Seal compared to other Blades in the Dark actual plays that I've listened to or watched, or other Blade sessions that I've played in or run, one, using a fugitive's playbook is a very different Blades in the Dark experience. Blades in the Dark, just the core book, if you are scoundrels who are looking to build a criminal empire, like the forward intentionality is very clearly defined from the beginning. And instead we played people who are not a crew at the beginning of session one. We became a crew
Right.
as a result of becoming friends who were becoming closer friends to one another. So there was a degree to which we were always playing the deeply emotional sitcom inside of the scoundrel heist game.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And those tensions created really interesting moments when we could get the heist stream and the emotional, like, character relationship stream point in the same direction. We got some really explosive play. But there were, I think, in those, especially in the first few sessions, times when we were kind of buffeted back and forth between some of the other elements, like the setting and plot elements, and getting to know our characters and one another there. And what I would say with regards to to Lone Wolf is that you have the advantage, or you can take the advantage in Lone Wolf of talking a little bit out of character at the beginning of the one shot, in kind of using the idle dreaming idea from Dream Apart, Dream Askew, of being semi in character but not in a scene. Of how do your initiates all know each other? Were you in the same class? You know, and basically putting it to the players to do a little bit of forging their character relationships. Something that I would encourage any Force in the Dark GM to do for a one shot is to spend a little bit of that time to get a sense, so that the players know a little bit more about how their characters feel about each other. And that can then set you up for success later. The other thing I would say on one shots is, and this depends on the player's comfort, is harder scene framing, where you go, okay, the players have said, this is what we're doing next. And then you go, okay, cool. So we jump to, and then you start them as late in the scene as possible.
Yeah.
Like basically, because a one shot is a short story
right.
in actual play, compared to a TV, like compared to a mini series is maybe a movie or a novella, and a long series is a novel or a book series. And so you have to constrain cast, time, and or plot beats and or setting in a one shot.
That is actually a very good analogy. I think you just broke my brain a little bit, Mike.
This is secretly also an episode of Speculate Now.
Exactly. And by the way, ! Speculate for more details about that podcast.
Yes, please. Because in a, more action, more scenes can take place in a short story than can take place in one chapter of a novel on average. But it means that they need to happen quicker and more clearly.
Yeah.
And that's something that you need to establish then as the GM. That if characters have already made the consensus that they're moving to the next scene, then you move to the next scene and then things start happening. Because that also solves the problem of getting from one place to the next. Because you no longer need to debate whether they're going there or how long it takes. You just get to make decisions and leave them to deal with the consequences of those decisions.
Yeah. Because one of the things that, because one of those things about the decisions that get made in that context is driven by how much they understand the way they have in the past, or that they imagine in the past they would have been able to work with each other. That thing about the short story sort of comparison, I think, is useful here too. When I first started myself as a writer writing short stories, I assumed that they were just kind of like mini novels, because I came to it basically from long form, either academic essays or academic books, or from novels. I wrote novels before I wrote short. I mean, not counting like middle school stuff, but I mean like as a professional. And that's dead wrong. Like, they are not many novels. Short stories really are distilled ideas, usually one idea, maybe two, depending on how long the story is. But so thinking about it that way, that there's like an idea that's being presented in this one shot. Obviously there's the goal, but there's also the idea philosophically that I would like them to kind of imagine throughout the process of getting that one shot. And I guess that doesn't, and you had not planned Blades in the Dark as a one shot. It was supposed to be a, time limited campaign. Turned out to be not as limited in time, but it was definitely a campaign. But you sort of picked it up over time. But that's interesting to sort of think of painting in somewhat brighter colors and focusing on the idea of a single concept or idea, or maybe two at most, that we're really getting in the process of play. Like, some of it is obvious, like, combat. There will be some combat in this one shot. But there's also stuff much beyond that, including who they are as players and what the system is. Because as far as I know, some of them, I believe Brandon and one or two others, Brandon Crilly and a couple of others, have like experience with Lone Wolf, the series, like the series of game books, and they know something about the world. But most of them, but some of them do not, and none of them, as far as I know, have ever actually played the Lone Wolf adventure game. So they are going to be picking up on a new rule set and they're going to be picking up in some cases on a new world itself. So I guess I don't want to, in the midst of that, also introduce a bunch of ideas that they've also got to grapple with, because there's, limited time. So an idea that I can focus on in play that sort of explicates all that. Okay. That's interesting. Go ahead, Mike. What were you going to say? I'm just writing that down.
I'm thinking of basically one-off episodes within larger series. Like, okay, like some one-off episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, or some one-off episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Like Strange New Worlds has an episode this season that is very clearly riffing on Ursula K. Le Guin's The Ones That Walk Away from Omelas.
Nice.
Which then itself is drawing on Brothers Karamazov, which kind of goes all the way back to, you can trace that almost tail type back a bunch of different ways. Lots of people who are, of course, science fiction people are like, this just rips off The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. But lots of people have done that. And Le Guin herself said, here's where this comes from.
Right.
And then N.K. Jemisin wrote a short story that riffs on The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, that where the main character could almost be a Kai Lord. Which is how I got to this point.
Okay.
Because you get the description of the cool festival, and then you get to this is what the point of the story is. That if I can spoil a short story,
but I want to know the title of this story for later.
It's called The Ones Who Fight and The Ones Who Stay and Fight.
Oh yes. I heard about this. I had not read it though.
They live in a near utopia, but its dimension is adjacent to our dimension, and you can pick up basically radio or broadcast signals.
Okay.
And that there are people who tune into our dimension and then learn the idea of hatred or oppression or a scarcity mindset, and then bring that into this near utopia where they were not raised to be racist, but then they learned about the idea of racism and then propagate it into this city. And so the city that is this near utopia, their solution to this is that when they discover that people have done this and have basically the mimetic virus of oppression has corrupted this person sufficiently, they just have to be removed from the city entirely.
Okay.
And so you have basically, you have secret police, but the secret police are there to keep the idea of oppression, or basically keep the idea of hatred, bigotry, or whatever out of the populace. Because if it propagates, it would destroy the city, because they have sufficiently modified and pushed their culture in a certain direction so that they no longer have those concepts. But the people who are these secret police, necessarily by their work, have been quote unquote infected a little by these ideas, because they have to know about them to be able to deal with them. And so you have a parallel order of kind of these agents who are contending with moral and ethical challenges. So this is
also a riff, it feels like to me, off The City and the City. I mean, there's a lot of the same kind of, which is one of my favorite books, that covers a lot of the same ideas. People who can go back and forth between these cities run the risk of somewhat being corrupted, right, by the presence of the other and being in breach, which is the worst thing you can be in that game.
Yeah, so the thing that I pulled back, that I can kind of try to bring back to Lone Wolf from here is, if we have these characters who are moving into or going and finding or stumbling into a situation where someone has gone so far out of bounds morally, ethically, spiritually, or whatever, that the question raised is, how do we do damage control? Is it moral to basically I'm going to use let's use an agricultural metaphor anyway. Is it the right thing to do to cut off this whole limb of the tree so that the rot does not destroy the forest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is played off on multiple occasions. Yeah, that's interesting.
Because like I think ultimately for this game, as you've described it, we want to set you up so that you can present a moral quandary to the player characters for them, the players to to discuss amongst themselves.
Right.
Ideally, not at such length that it kind of breaks your pacing. But I think the clearer and more immediate the stakes of that decision, the easier it will probably be to make it work for a one-shot.
That makes sense.
Because like then at least some of your variables about this quandary are known. Okay, we know X, which is this thing is happening and something needs to be done before, by tonight. We sacrifice an adult, every year to ward off X monster, and the town has decided not to do it, and then someone has kidnapped a person to go off and do the sacrifice. Well, the sacrifice has to be done by midnight tonight. So if that's your plot, they're going to have to make a decision there.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I like that. So again, it sort of is in line with accelerating the moral timetable, which means that it sort of clarifies for them in hopefully some stark relief what the moral decision calculus has to be, but also doesn't give them a chance to kind of endlessly debate it. I mean, and again, that's kind of a reflection of that test. I don't think you were here for this, Brandon, when I was talking about the tests, but one of the tests literally involves the Kai Masters putting moral quandaries to the initiates, but then they have 1 minute to answer. So they just they're given a minute and their first answer is their answer. Not like this. Well, actually, let me rephrase. Like, no. Like, this is the decision that you make. So in a way, that's kind of what you're referring to, I think, Mike, is creating a time-constrained moral calculus, either based on one or two quandaries that can develop them as Kai Lords.
Urgency and concrete consequences.
Yeah. Do this and that happens.
It makes me suddenly very curious what lesson Kai Lords are imagine personally they're supposed to learn. Is it that you're going to need to act fast for the sake of others, or is it you're going to have consequences either way, so you might as well just settle with a consequence now?
But that initial consequences, in fact, I'm looking for the sidebar, that literally one of the big sidebars is making choices count. So like one of their big things is the importance of emphasizing consequences. But I think the idea is to have prepared ahead of time to have the moral matrix you need to make these decisions quickly, right? Like the thing is, for all of the Jedi councils, to go back to the Star Wars example, debating about meditation and thinking about it and all their caution, like in the field, the Jedi don't spend their time being like, I wonder how I deal with this. Like the Jedi are immediately like, think about the prequel. Darth Maul, Anakin and Qui-Gon are running back to the ship. Qui-Gon turns around and sees Darth Maul closing in on Anakin. He's like, Anakin, drop, lightsaber out, battle. Like, there's no like, well, wait a minute, let me think about this. Let me contemplate. Let me call a board meeting. Like, jokes aside, the Jedi they go when they need to go, but only because they've spent so much time meditating and thinking ahead of time about possibilities and options. So it's like the opposite of analysis paralysis, right? It's avoiding that by having run through scenarios, many of them, before we get to this point. So maybe that's one of the things we're talking about, is like emphasizing with the players, how have you thought about moral quandaries in the past? Like what will be the hardest thing for you to be tested by? What's the thing that will be the hardest thing for you to override if you come across it, or what line must you in your own mind not cross that you might have to? So maybe that's another way to think about it too, is have them think of potential moral quandaries even ahead of the session. I mean, that might lead into this.
Okay, so Greg, this is something not to do, but it would be very funny if you did. Open the game by playing Inhuman Conditions and having the players be in character. Inhuman Conditions is kind of a Voight-Kampff test with the serial numbers filed off game. And that just, it made
It's
me
a
think
kinder,
of that.
gentler Cards Against Humanity is what you're saying?
Like, I think a way that you could distill that into a usable version is that part of that getting to know the characters is asking the player or asking the character, what question were you asked in your test and how did you answer?
Yeah.
Or you give them a question, you say, how did your character answer, and have they changed their mind in the X years since their trial?
That's actually really good. I'm going to completely rip this off, and I want you all to remember that when I do it, if that's okay. That's great.
I'm here for you.
I'm going to call it the Underwood Protocol, and I'm going to make a book about it and make millions and not write any of my own stuff, and it'll all be titles like that. Not that I'm referring to anyone specific. So what question were you asked in your test? How do you answer? That's really good. Yeah. Specifically the moral test about this.
Because the other bit, and we probably don't need both of these, is positing to the group that basically asking each other these kinds of questions like you are college sophomores at 2 a.m. Is a thing that the Kai initiates do.
Yes. All right, listen, do you know this band called Pink Floyd?
Right.
Really great.
What if we are the universe experiencing itself so that Kai can learn what good is?
What if I only know that because you made me think that just now when I did that? Pass the brownie.
Oh, God.
Just a brownie. I'm not saying anything. Okay, so what did you give up when you... The other thing, I'm not going to do this for all of them, but I think the other question I would ask them, I love this idea, Mike, that's really helpful, of asking them for what the test was that they did. The other thing besides the moral test is that test of sacrifice that I mentioned. Brandon, one of these tests that they have to do is a test where they have to give up a sentimental keepsake from their childhood. And they're not told this until it comes to it, where they're like, okay, you have to give up this thing that's really valuable. So that's the other thing I would ask is why was it morally, like, what did you give up? Why was it sentimentally important, and why did you give it up? And just those two questions. What was the moral test they asked you, and how did you answer? And then what keepsake did you give up? Those two things I think can be fairly quick, but it gives a kind of background that will help ground them and the other players in understanding what that was. So that's really helpful. Okay. So actually, this is a good point to reset because we have about half hour left. You are watching, chat, the incredible team of Speculate, as it turns out, but specifically my friends and teammates here. And that, of course, is Michael R. Underwood with a new book out today. Not new, a re-release of a book, Celebromancy, out, which you should get. And Brandon O'Brien, who has many things, including amazing game design work. You see him on here with Sound Clash the Clampdown and GMing right now Girl by Moonlight, Fractal Spire, and appearing as part of things like Court of Blades and things like that as players with myself. But Brandon is also a wonderful poet with a book, Can You Sign My Tentacle, which you should all buy because it's amazing. In addition to doing this, though, we are also, I am personally, I won't speak for everyone else, trying to push the Greyshade Kickstarter as well. We have about 11 days to go on the Greyshade Kickstarter. And this Greyshade Kickstarter features the last two books in the Grey Assassin trilogy, which starts with this book, Greyshade. The last two books are Renegade and Heretic, and those are being published by Athos Arts. And there is also a 5e game being produced by Alligator Alley Entertainment. Aaron Rosenberg is the designer, and Rich Lescouflair is consulting on 5e related stuff. So Alligator Alley is producing that game. That is also being backed by this Kickstarter, as is an audiobook from one Mr. Trendane Sparks, who is amazing and is the voice of Santiago Espinosa in the Battletech games, etc. And there's even a coin, a founder's coin, which you can get for lower backer numbers. The earlier you back, the lower the number you get on the coin, which is really awesome, based on an illustration by Tari Tunes. So we have a lot of amazing elements of this. Brandon was actually, Mike read a first version of this some time ago. Brandon was also instrumental with a later sensitivity read on a later version, and discussions like this one, actually, that we had about that series. So we are running a little bit of a incentive at the moment. If in the next half hour, chat, you support if you support at the $125 or above level, you will get 4 of the Reyes books in ebook form from Mike, who's being incredibly generous in doing that. And for the first 2 backers who at me on Twitter during the same time period over the next half hour, I will send you copies, signed copies, physical copies of my Icarus and Jelinek award-winning graphic novels from Athos Arts. So you can get all of that, but only if you jump on board in the next half hour. If you've been waiting to fund, please don't. Do it now, because we really would love to see that funding happen. And remember, if for some reason it doesn't fund, though I'm sure that it will, but if for some reason it didn't, you're not out any money. And if it does fund, then you get the awesome product. So that's what we would all hope for,
I want to make a pitch on behalf of forgetful people and people who are struggling with executive function, which I think is a lot of people in current times. I, as a Kickstarter backer, often will flag a Kickstarter being like, cool, I'm going to come back to that when there's 48 hours left. We have no idea what ridiculous things are going to happen in the world or the universe or whatever. And if you have flagged that campaign to say, cool, I'm going to come back to it, there's no guarantee that some random thing won't happen and completely take up all of your attention.
Yeah.
And then the campaign may pass you by. And if all of the people who kind of use that framework that I often fall into of cool, that looks interesting, I'm going to come back and reevaluate it later, see maybe if I'm still interested or whatever. If all of the people who are interested, who would go back and relook at the campaign again today and then decide, okay, if I want this to happen, I should back right now, because potential backers don't fund campaigns. You have to actually back it.
Yeah,
Kickstarter
well said.
Kickstarter is all or nothing. You cannot do a save at 12:01 p.m. 1 minute after the campaign has ended. It doesn't work that way. Kickstarter is about getting people to make a specific commitment to go in together to make something happen.
Yeah, thank you and I agree with all of that, and thank you for putting it that way. That's quite right. We need people, now to be able to jump on board. So please do that, and you will get these incentives. We've had some backers already and some money come in already today, but I would love to see this get to 13.5 because again, we just need to continue to move this forward. We are still, a little less than 12,000 shy, so we do have a lot of work to go. Still have 11 days to do it, so we got time, but we do need to make some positive progress. So please consider doing that, and you will get that stuff. Okay.
And I will also,
yes.
I'll also very briefly add, because this is a thing that I forget about Kickstarters very often, also as a part of lacking executive function. No one's asking you for money yet.
Right.
You just need to click the button. So long as you will have money in 11 days, this is perfectly fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, please do the thing.
Yeah.
And a reminder, of course, that at 200 backers, we add a new class to the Grey Shade RPG.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. I don't even think Greg knows what it is yet. Please let us find out what it is.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I don't know, because when we get to that stage, there are going to be a choice of 3, and the backers will be voting on which of the 3 gets put forward. So I can't know what it is, because it's going to be a choice of 3 that the backers choose. So yes.
Right.
You not only get a cool RPG, you get to engage in democracy.
That's
do
the
the
idea.
thing.
Democracy.
Right, and you have to already be a backer, otherwise you're not going to be able to see that update.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're going to need to be part of that. Enchanted hot dog vendor will not be a choice. That will not occur. But I appreciate the support, Trent. Trent, maybe I'll include a voice actor in Corel. Your thoughts about with that?
Ooh, now I'm suddenly very curious now that I've read the book. I'm not going to say the thing aloud because many people haven't read the book, but I'm curious if there is a class that does some of the cool things that one of Grey Shade's very trusted mentors does in the book.
It's one of the things I'm thinking about. Yes, I know exactly what you're speaking of. Yes, I had thought about that, and I don't know what to call it yet, but I have thought about that as one of the options. And in case you're like, what are they talking about? It's amazing. please support the Kickstarter, and you will find out, and you'll be able to get a copy of the Gray Shade ebook when you do that, or a physical book right now, because that's already out and here. But the later books, Renegade and Heretic and all that stuff, will come out as a part of this. So, and as Garlic Tofu mentioned, new updates and stuff like that in Gray Shade. So please do support, and also spread the word. If you've already pledged, I know many of you in chat have, please do spread the word to others. Please let people know in other venues, whether it's Reddit, whether it's Twitter, whether it's TikTok, whether it's any of those places, Instagram, Snapchat, Smoke Signal, Carrier Pigeon, whatever it is. Please let people know, because we want to make sure that we keep broadening things out. Okay, so with that said, let's get back into this. So I think the other question then that I want to present, or that I want to kind of put forward here, is thinking a little bit about so I'm trying to think of how to put this. I guess what I'm curious is, I know that I, as a GM, improvise a lot. In fact, I take pleasure in the fact and pride in the fact that if I do things well, that my players will very seldom know when I'm improvising and when I'm working off book. I try to make it seamless, and I think I'm pretty good at it, at being able to make, so a lot of stuff that people play through is heavily off book, and for example, Curse of Strahd was very different than other people's Curses of Strahd. Everybody talked about the fact that my Espergenesis, as the Alligator Alley people talked to me about, and Brandon was in that conversation when this happened, was very different than the way that they imagined their Shadow of the Zephyr campaign going, largely because the players went in a very different direction, and as they went in that direction, I made a bunch of stuff up, basically, to kind of balance with them, so that there was all this stuff about meeting the original creator of this AI networked universe. I mean, a lot of that was just me, that I was making based upon feedback from the players. So my question is, in a one-shot, because that's all longer campaign stuff, in a one-shot, how far off book, especially when people may not be as familiar with the book? As I said, there may be some more familiar with Lone Wolf, but certainly not as much as kind of this sort of bog standard traditional D&D, or even Blades in the Dark, which I would say at this point, people know a lot about Dunwall and about the kind of premise and the feel of a place like this. So, but in the case of Lone Wolf, I will try to paint the colors as brightly as I can so people can know what the world is like in basic terms. But how far off book would you, if you were GMing a one-shot like this in a system that's going to, certainly the system will be different, will be unfamiliar to most of the players. How far off book would you go in something like this? Is it just based on what the players give you, or do you put in more guardrails? That's for either of you, I think.
I mean, I also really enjoy improvising a lot. All of Sinded Seal was mostly improvisation.
I had a feeling.
I do think, especially with a one shot, because as Mike mentioned earlier, you're kind of relying on focusing all of the narrative energy into a couple of scenes, so you get to those important things as soon as possible.
Right.
I think what is particularly useful in that kind of improvisation as a result is to know the scope of how deviations might occur, and like prepare a couple things in advance in the event that you want that deviation to lead to the point where you want another thing to happen. Can I give you a for instance that, and like specifically that happens? Again, if you're actually playing in this, depart immediately, or just mute the stream for a minute. So let's say hypothetically another GM who is not Greg.
So like for example, so there is at one point a thief appears, and basically you're having a discussion with the merchant to whom this caravan belonged, and a thief shows up and basically rips away a coin purse and goes all Jean Valjean on them and kind of runs away with the coin purse. And the question is, first of all, you have to chase the thief. You could let the thief go. You could also, when you catch the thief, you could fight them, you could intimidate them, you could demand the thief surrender. You also could then decide, once you've dealt with the thief one way or the other, how you handle what the thief tells you. So there's a specific series of choices, but there's obviously an opportunity too to be able to get into some detail about, like, you mean you stole this because you don't have any bread because this bastard caravan owner doesn't whatever, or maybe not. It might not even be that. It might just be that you're sort of a screw up who, has made a bunch of bad decisions, and so instead of you have too much pride to actually ask people for help, so instead you try to rip them off. However it's going to be worked out, that'll be sort of partially discussed in the way of play. But that's a specific example there, Brandon, of actual choice trees, decisions that they've got to make, which may have moral branching points that go off of what the book provides. So yeah, so that's a specific example of that, I think, that you're talking about.
Yeah, because I think the description, the example that you gave already comes with a good sense of how those decisions still connect in ways that inform players of the next point. I think a lot about this book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Chronicle of a Death Foretold.
I love that book. I taught it in my short novel class. It's a great book.
It's a wild book, and I still have so many feelings about the fact that I read that in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing that enamors me the most about that book is everybody knows what's about to happen, even when it is not their business or they have no reason to gain that information.
Yep.
And many characters are given opportunities to interact, and their interactions are what leads to that event still being guaranteed. And I feel like, in a lot of ways, a good staying on mission in an RPG is very much like that as well. Giving players as many opportunities as possible to gain the information that is necessary, and be motivated to behave in certain ways, even when they didn't respond in a certain other way. The thing that I always find most hilarious about Chronicle of a Death Foretold is local law enforcement knows that two men have said aloud that they're going to kill a man, that they work in a butcher's shop and just left that butcher's shop with the two sharpest knives that they own each.
Yep.
And they just go to the brothers and go, "Give me those knives. Please don't kill anyone today." And then the sheriff goes home, and his wife confronts him in the middle of the night afterwards and says, "They're butchers by trade, right?"
Yeah.
You know how this is gonna go still, because because in the event that we imagine the sheriff as the PC, and NPC has just reminded them there are still stakes. You didn't actually progress the story in any way. You still need to respond. And I think that having enough opportunities for that, even if it's just the presentation of information by characters who will no longer be in the scene anymore, is still useful in the event of making sure that people are aware of what the stakes still are.
Yeah. That's actually really useful, because I have not thought about that book. I haven't taught my short novel course in a number of years now, but I used to teach it all the time there. The other thing that's striking about that book, which is useful for this, although I have to be careful the paranoia angle that I mentioned before, is that that is one of the best examples of an unreliable narrator, because you know at the very beginning of the book the person who's killed, and you know who did it, within the first page. And much of the book then is about figuring out why they did it and why nobody stopped it in the way that Brandon describes. What you find out in the middle of the book, and I don't really think this is a spoiler per se, it's told in a very journalistic style, and in fact the person who's telling it is actually supposed to be a journalist, except you find out in the middle of the book that he actually was also a resident of the town, and was in fact at the town brothel when a lot of this was happening. So you immediately are like, well, wait a minute. So the people involved, you were in the town. This is not someone who's just oh, here's a slice of life story you'll find fascinating. That was their lives that you're referring to, the people that you knew directly. Yeah, it's such a good book. And different in a lot of ways from other stuff that Marquez writes, because there's no magical realism in that. It's just, straight up front. So to go back to this example then, I guess so. I mean, I guess the question is when I'm making some of these like moral decisions and moral questions, Mike, when you're doing this, do you give people, I guess in a campaign, obviously there's going to be more development of that character. Do you leave a one-shot open-ended enough that they could make decisions that could eventually cause them to come into conflict with Kai ideals or, whatever the case may be, even though there is at least the possibility that those things will never be explored, that vision will never be examined in great detail or not? And maybe you're going to tell me it depends on the players, which, but.
Yeah, I try to aim for like a concrete ending. Like, here's the decision you've made, here are the direct implications, and then we do epilogues, and in the epilogues maybe we gesture toward what could be next for you. In the Court of Blades home game that I just finished, part of some of the characters' epilogues was, okay, we've done one season of TV effectively. If the show got picked up again, here's the season 2 plot for your character.
Okay.
So that gives a sense that the characters' lives don't end at the end of the session.
Okay.
The best bit of like constrained prep advice that I have gotten comes from Austin Walker, who is the host and GM of Friends at the Table, which is one of my, if not my favorite actual play show that I'm not involved in. And Austin, for Forge in the Dark level missions, thinks about it as if he were building a level for the video game Hitman.
Okay.
So it's very specifically constrained space, and then thinking about what will characters do if nothing, like absent PC interference, what will play out, what will happen, and thinking about what elements, aspects, and like geographical bits are interconnected like a clock, right? What are people's routes? What systemic interactions are there? And basically have in mind some cast and some props / set pieces, so that then anywhere within those bounds, you have a sense, or at least enough of a sense, that you can jumpstart your improv within those bounds. Because a thing that I do maybe more than a lot of GMs that I know is that I will pop up to the writer's room level and say, like, this is what I have in mind. Either at the beginning of a campaign, like the beginning of a one-shot, I'll say, okay, so I've got like basically 3 scenes in mind. You're going to do a type of an X, a Y, and a Z. And I leave those vague enough that there's still like discovery and interest. But I'm basically tapping my collaborators as co-storytellers, being like, this is what I have in mind for the evening. Like, if you can help me get there. And that doesn't have to necessarily be at the beginning. Sometimes kind of popping up to that level is, hey, in the interest of time, I think it may make sense for us to jump ahead to the next scene. Is there anything else anybody wants to kind of get across here? Or sometimes I will say, like, that seems like a good place to leave this scene. And that those can be tools that will help do that writer thing of get into a scene as late as possible, get out of it as early as possible.
Yeah, and thinking about it in terms of those scenic breakdowns is very helpful. Actually, my Eberron campaign, which is this big epic level 1 to level 20 campaign, but has been very helpful to think of it in terms of seasons. And the first 4 parts were basically season 1, and we're in the midst of season 2 now, which is the next set of parts. And so, but thinking about it in terms of that, and then on a micro level, the scene level within each session is important for this. Okay. All right. That's useful.
Yeah, and like one-shots, live one-shots are really wild for me because I'll be nervous going into them. And then as soon as we start playing, or as soon as I'm doing the like orienting the players right before we go live, I'm just like, ADHD brain is like active on cosmic levels, and I'm just 150% tapped into everything. And it's like some of the most alive that I feel on like a more than once every few years basis. And I think that it helps me make like micro adjustments and like be able to guide and shape play. And I don't do that as much with a campaign because we're not as like constrained, but I think manifesting those constraints so they don't feel like as much just constraints on me as the GM, but that they are fruitful constraints that we as a group are playing with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, literally employing them as allies in the storytelling, narrative approach is not only a good thing in and of itself, but good in this particular regard to avoid kind of locking down, we got stuck in scene 1, we never got to scene 3. They didn't even know there was a scene 3. Yeah. So that's helpful to be able to know that. Brent, I guess as we're closing in on the end here, I guess I would ask, I forget what I was so interested in that last bit of that Mike said. I now forgot the other question I was going to ask about this, which is, okay, well, let me ask it this way then, since I don't remember what I was originally going to ask. So Mike's idea was this idea of, in the moral test that you get to become an initiate, asking the player, what question were you asked and how did you answer? What was the moral quandary you were given? And then I added the what did you give up when you gave up the keepsake, the sentimental thing. Is there a particular prompt, Brandon, that you would give the players for think up, what question, like the generic version of this is how did you get to know each other? But something along the lines of like, what first mission did you go on with each other? What was the first disagreement that you may have had with someone and how did you resolve it? I'm kind of thinking out loud, but I'm wondering about those kind of cue questions. And again, I don't want them to be like enormous, like tell me the first 5 years of your life in detail, with stages of, we don't have time for that. But like, what kind of question would you encourage the players to ask of themselves, I guess?
So because these are like player relationship questions, like I lean very heavily on the dream askew, dream apart kind of relationship generation framing, which is that you either ask this question or this question is asked of you by someone else at the table about your own relationship. Like in Dream Askew and Dream Apart, they literally have character questions, and the frame of the character questions is ask this of the player to your left. And I kind of want a question to have that kind of energy, and I think not only because this is about their relationship to each other, but because all of these prompts are a relationship to their ideals, a relationship to their perception of community in particular, and a perception of what is required of them to be empathetic or proactive in the world.
Okay.
And this is a bad version of the question, but this is the first question that came to mind. The person to your left tried to help you with something. Why does that upset you? Because it means that the thing that you're qualifying is simultaneously somebody thought that they were trying to be empathetic towards you, and you don't like the result of their action. And both of y'all get to discuss what that was and why.
Okay.
I feel like that's not the question, but a question with that energy is, I think, what I'm gravitating toward.
Yeah, I loved Bonds as written in Court of Blades, and kind of am trying to adapt them to use them in Genrenauts, to have that kind of range of more or less provocative character relationship prompts, which for me, I feel like is an evolution of Hex / relationship in Apocalypse World. Which is Apocalypse World is great for one shots because the game is set up to basically be an escalation machine. You just like it's like a dog that thinks they're in water, because they get going, and then you put them in water and they just go off.
Yeah.
And then everything explodes.
And I was gonna say, and then everything goes to hell. Okay. Yeah, that's because, and the reason that I focused quite a bit of attention in questions about character building, or character relationship building, really, is that is going to, because again, so much of this world to me is fascinating because it is infused with this philosophy and the living out of one's creed. And so the question then becomes, how do they imagine their creed? Right. And that, I think, is one of the most interesting aspects of this. And it's the stuff that, the basic adventure beats and the action beats are I mean, I'll be able to handle that. That's totally fine. But figuring out what questions kind of define that person's morality, and the morality vis-a-vis each other will, I think, be useful for this too. So, yeah, so I got...
Because that, old saying that a lot of people often say, and I feel like I said a version of this the last time Mike and I were doing Court of Blades world building. If you ask 5 Christians what they believe about Jesus Christ, you'll get 6 different answers. And I feel like asking people whose duty it is to perform goodness, what they believe about their own goodness and about other people's goodness, is a very good gauge of not only how their clashing ideologies relate to each other, but whether there is a potential common ground there because it is framed by action.
Yeah, and whether the action may redefine what they imagined about themselves too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Plus, it helps you figure out a great deal more about your character hooks, because you know that, one, there is already a character built in to have a kind of conflict about that, and 2, you know whether a certain kind of action would be a very useful narrative foil for that conflict, because they've already given you that information.
That's cool. Yeah, that is a lot of good info, folks. That is a lot of good info. And I think the main things that I've taken out on this are thinking about foregrounding philosophy in action, thinking about concentrating on not the end goal, but the environment, focusing on a single philosophical idea. The specifics, the question I'm completely ripping off from Mike directly, which is the, what questions were you asked in your moral test and how did you answer? And then I added this thing about the keepsake. And then the idea about the energy that you just mentioned, Brandon, before, about essentially what was the way in which someone failed you in an effort to help you, or, that kind of thing, basically. And thinking about a way to do that. And so having those in the back of my mind, I mean, some of those I will directly ask, but even having those in the back of my mind will help to kind of shape, I think, the way that the characters know each other. And then the rest of it is thinking about how they want to deal with the actual imminent threat, and are they more likely to view the threat as having broader implications, or are they more likely to view the threat as being something which they, as Kai Lords, can contain? Or is this a lot bigger than the monastery or Sommerlund or Magnamund even? There's a lot more going on that needs to be addressed. So, and that also will be up to the players to decide how their characters would respond. So, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a lot of really good information. I am really thankful that you both came on to talk about this, and that we got to understand more about the way in which your minds work as far as world building is concerned. And I will use this, and we'll use it to good effect, I hope, in the Bag of Giving stream on Monday. I guess, since we're sort of at time here, I guess I will start by asking Brandon. Brandon, thank you again for all the work on this. Where will the fine folks find some of your GM and world building shenanigans reflected, and or other stuff that you want to promote about you that's going forward?
Hi again, everybody. It's me, Brandon O'Brien. Pronouns he, him, or they, them. I have been on this channel a lot lately.
You have. Sorry.
Just the other day, I had another world building stream with our good friend Michael Underwood, where we did some pre-game prep for Court of Blades Val Award. So if you want to check out that, please check that out. You will see two erudite individuals having very meaningful conversation over a children's drawing, and it will be very entertaining. But really, that
best
was
metaphysical
actually
religious drawing ever created by some scribbles on a map.
But yeah, that was a very lovely chat. Earlier, last week, Greg and I actually had two very lovely conversations with folks from Alligator Alley Entertainment about the Grey Shade RPG, and I'm very excited about that. A reminder again that is a thing that you can get your hands on if you join the Grey Shade Kickstarter right now.
Do it right now.
It's really cool. The stuff that we've discussed about the RPG is very impressive. I'm very excited about the thing existing, but it will only exist if you support it, so please make the thing happen. Again, as usual, I am a member of the triumvirate of the Speculate podcast alongside Michael R. Underwood and Gregory A. Wilson. So you can find me on here a lot. I will be playing in the Court of Blades game Val Award very, very soon. Our next session is sometime in the next few weeks, if I'm not mistaken. I am also the GM of our other Speculate game, Girl by Moonlight, Fractal Spire, sponsored very generously by Evil Hat Productions. So if you want to see me GM my game with our strange friends, Michael R. Underwood, Yoiga Wayne Lin, Iori Kusano, and Valerie Valdez, that is coming up very, very soon as well on this channel. And of course, my own game, Sound Clash, has an actual play on this channel as well. Sound Clash The Clampdown, starring Iori Kusano, Victor Villavicencio, Katie Chin, and Amor Amaraz, and that's coming up very soon as well. Date to be announced, but we are going to definitely have a session in the month of July, so please look out for more information about that as well. I have a book. Can You Sign My Tentacle?
It's a good book. Can confirm.
I am pleased to hear that it is a good book because it's been nominated for a Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association Elgin Award. So if you want to get your hands on a thing that other people think is cool, and read some very interesting poetry about the gods of the Cthulhu mythos, asking Donald Glover for an autograph, please get your hands on the thing. You can find me on the internet at The Rising Tides on Twitter and Instagram, and on Twitch, where sometimes I do things. And yeah, that's me, I think.
Thank you, Brandon, as always. Really, really appreciate all the extra time that you've been on and part of this, but thank you. Moving right on up the line, Mike, who has also been on a fair bit of late with world building streams and things like that, and also has a book being re-released today. So thank you as well, Mike, for jumping on board with all this. So same question, what in particular would you like people to be focusing on with, other than, of course, the elephant in the room, that elephant being the Celebromancy re-release here. What else besides that, or including that, do you want to have highlighted for folks?
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody, folks in chat, most of whom I know. Thanks for hanging out with us while we talk these things through. Thank you to Greg and Brandon for a very fun time. Whenever we get together, even when we're trying to talk about like brainstorming and logistics and whatever, we end up having a really fun time, which is a great indication of a productive partnership. So I am on Twitter at Mike R. Underwood. I mostly signal boost at this point. I stream games twice a week, Wednesdays and Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/turbotango. I play a lot of roguelike deck builders and other things. I'm looking at like figuring out what some RPGs I can play that I can play over a longer chunk of time, and I'm really enjoying doing the world building and game prep stuff. So I may do more of that, which you can probably find by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Michael R. Underwood. If you really like my things already and you want how can I get more things from the brain of Mike Underwood? The Patreon is how you can do that. As mentioned, Celebromancy is back out today in ebook and in paperback. You can already get the new edition of Geekomancy in paperback or ebook. Both of these are also in audio, but the audio is an older edition. Geekomancy is available as part of the Indie Bundle for Abortion Funds, hosted by Caro Assertion over at itch.io. It has raised $155,000 so far, which is pretty good for being like 2 or 3 days in. So if you find yourself already having backed the Gray Shade Kickstarter and looking to put some money into a good cause to support abortion funds, then you can do that because that's the order of operations that we're doing today. And if you want to catch more world building, Brandon and I did a world building stream for Court of Blades, and part of that is going to go into the Speculate feed, thanks to some editing by our lovely editor, Rudy Basso. So if you are a Speculate listener, you can expect to see about a half an hour to 45-minute chunk of that in your feed this week before we get another episode of Fractal Spire. And otherwise, I will be on the internet.
Also, I should say, Mike, again, the co-founder of the Bag of Giving thing that this Lone Wolf thing is part of. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, isn't this Monday's session going to also benefit abortion rights, I believe?
Yes, I believe I'm just double checking.
I need to update that, actually.
Yeah. So for Bag of Giving, we are also supporting the National Network of Abortion Funds, which is the same charity that the itch.io bundle is supporting. The great thing about this is that website has a bunch of individual groups that it supports. So if you wanted, you could, for Bag of Giving, you could go to specifically one of those groups, donate to them, and then know, oh, my money is specifically going to people in the state of, I don't know, maybe Alabama to help people. Because as I've come to understand in the last few years, your direct giving can have a larger impact when it is working with a group that is very locally specific and has a locally oriented mandate, as opposed to like giving to Planned Parenthood in general versus like, oh, this one person will then be able to like have one more work hour from some person that they employ in order to help people directly. And so if you find yourself very angry about the way things are in the world and wanting to put some of your money to do something about it, organizations and funds like this are a great way of knowing that your money is going to go as far as it can.
I agree with all of that, and would also, and that I like the Maryland Food Bank was one of the things that was benefited by Bag of Giving, and that was an example of that kind of more local approach. I agree with all of that. I will also say, since we were talking about this, there's going to be a video going live on my TikTok. I still can't believe I'm saying that. But anyway, there's going to be a video going live on my TikTok in which I'm going to use a clip that I talked about a couple of days ago from Gray Shade, which talks about defiance. And one of the prevailing ideals of this book is hope. It's about redemption. It's also about defiance. It is about defiance in the face of dogma and separating dogma from faith. And so defiance and resistance is an important element of that. And that's a little bit of what I'm reminded of. If you're angry, you can do something about it, but it begins with the defiant act of saying you will do something. And so anyway, this is a chance to be able to do that. So I am so grateful to both my friends and Speculate co-hosts. You can see why they're brilliant and amazing people. What if I already backed? How do I get those delicious extra books? That's a good question, Big Boss. If you already backed.
I would say if it's okay with Greg, if you were to increase your pledge to the next tier,
yes,
I would be very happy to send you a Geekomancy ebook, or all of them if the tier that you go up to is that 125.
In fact, I'll add to that, Big Boss. If you were doing, I don't remember what you backed at, but if you were to increase to the next tier, I would still, and it was up to that 125 or above, I'd still do the Icarus Jelinek thing that I mentioned before, and or if you were able to, So basically, yes. I don't have another. I was about to add, and also what I already said. So yes, you could do that. That would be how you would get those delicious extra books. And thank you to Mike for doing that. I didn't ask to do that. What if I back to the max tier? Did you? If you, well, then first of all, you're an officer and a gentleman. And if that's true, then get someone else to do that. I don't know. Except to say that I'm extremely grateful. This is the problem with incentives, is you're always trying to get people to be like, limited edition. Then you need to let me know if that's true. Thank you, Big Boss. And then you should let me know separately, and I can figure out something that I could work out with Mike. Maybe I can even, drop a few bucks Mike's way, and Mike can send that off to you, because I also don't want Mike just giving his books away for free, because Mike needs to eat. We're writers. We need to also eat and be paid for things. But I'm really grateful if that's the case, Big Boss. I didn't know, because I'm not looking at the backer list to go, aha, So if that's the case, then I'm really grateful, and we can figure out a way to handle that. But others can be inspired by Big Boss's example. Okay. With all that said, you can increase it again. You can double max the tier. Anyway.
Right. Well, because you set the tier that you're like trying to claim, but then you can put the number way above that if you want. But like if you're already backing at that top level, it's so high, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. But thank you again to both my friends and co-hosts on Speculate. I will see both of you in various contexts for different things. Court of Blades, I think, Mike, we've got coming up on
July 29th.
Right, July 29th.
Scheduled session.
But of course, I'll be speaking both these folks before that. But in any case, I might even employ them in a certain marathon system stream that I'm going to speak them about as well. So that will be, I will speak more with them about this. I have some ideas. But anyway, thank you to Mike Underwood. Thank you to Brandon O'Brien. Thanks so much to both of you, and I will see you folks later on. Check, we get some love for them. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brandon.
Bye all.
Bye.
All right. So that is going to do it for them. That was a lot of fun. I mean, separate from the Gray Shade stuff, that was a lot of fun to actually get a chance to talk world building and adventure game design. And we did probably a little bit less of the world building and more of the character building, but that was kind of what I imagined. And hey, and good to see you, Big Boss. And yeah, people, exactly what Garlic Tofu said, getting the campaign scene is really huge. We have a lot of project followers, a lot of people who have put in to be notified, but we don't want to rely on those folks. We want to get that. We need to get that number up as much as we can now. So again, people can pack at $1, or they can share it again with other places, whether it is on Reddit, whether it is on Twitter, whether it is on TikTok. And I think I actually never finished saying what I was going to say. Oh yeah, no, I did. I was going to talk about the fact that the TikTok video is going to have Defiance, but on those TikTok videos, there are also going to be very nice encapsulated versions of what each of the classes, the base classes that we have, are. And that is the Acolyte, it's the Informant, it is the Investigator, it is the Merchant, and it's the Noble. Those are the 5 base classes. When we hit 200 backers, remember, we will have a bonus class that will be added, and you will get to choose from among 3, by which I mean the backers will vote on which of the 3 becomes the actual class that is presented. So that's pretty exciting, and I would love that. So definitely make sure you do that. The world is, but you just have to build the characters in it. That's true. That's exactly right, Rudnell. So we're building those within this, and that's exciting. So I really like the Lone Wolf world. It's always had a nice flavor to me, and I'm very excited to be able to present it next Monday as we jump forward with the players. So that is going to be a good time. But for right now, I am going to wrap this up because I am going to be over on GOG.com's Twitch channel at 4:15 p.m. At 4 p.m. I should say, for Solasta as we continue with the Lost Valley DLC. So we're going to be doing that. That's going to be awesome. And then I may or may not come back tonight. I'm considering it. I might come back this evening because I'd like to be able to do some other stuff associated with... Hang on just a moment as I fix one issue. So I'd like to be able to do that and maybe come back with some stuff tonight. It's not our vocalist stuff tonight, but I might do that because that might be might be useful. So we'll see. I'll think about that. But in the meantime, I'm glad that we got a chance to talk some Lone Wolf, and I hope this whetted your appetite for more. If you want to see some of these like philosophical monk discussions, and all that kind of thing, if you're like, how do I learn more about this? Let me tell you how. You do it by checking out what's going to happen on Monday. But I'm going to rise up on out of here. Thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for joining me today. Again, I'll be back over on GogCom's Twitch channel in about a half hour. Until then, remember to follow the channel here. Check out the YouTube at !ArvTube and sub to me over there. !ArvCord. You can hang out with the Arvanauts in between streams on our Discord server there. And of course, Twitter is !ArvTweets. You can follow me over there. Website is arvaneleron.com. Financially, !ArvShop for the merchandise area. !ArvTrayon for my Patreon. Again, that really does make a difference, so thank you. But the thing, and I'll come back to what I'm really pushing, !Icarus for my Icarus graphic novel from Athos Arts, !Library for my Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, my 5e adventure and sourcebook from Alligator Alley Entertainment, !BLM, Black Lives Matter, very important to affirm and assert the significance and importance of Black lives, !Help Now, the World Health Organization page on suicide prevention, very important to reach out to others when you need help and to reach out to others when they need help as well, and !Ukraine, to help the people of Ukraine as they fight back against an illegal and illegitimate war and fight to maintain who they are and to preserve their autonomy. So this is a way that we can step forward as be a part of that. Last but certainly not least, though, very important today is to deal with !Grayshade KS. !Grayshade KS is the Grayshade Kickstarter. And again, I know I've been talking about it a lot, and I'm going to be talking about it a lot for the next 11 days. There is really a lot riding on this for a lot of people, and so we've gotten a very good response so far. 13,229 and 156 backers is a very good response, but we need to get up to that $25,000 limit to fund it, and so that's why we're asking people to spread the word and let people know. Many of you have already pledged, and so for you, thank you. I just want to say thanks to those of you who have pledged and spread the word. But if there are other communities that you are a part of that you can think of to let people know, if there are other people that you're like, you know what, I think you might like a story about, a kind of a person who goes through a dark night of the soul and has to come out on the other side of it. If you're looking for some hope with your darkness, if you like City of Thieves and that sort of kind of feel and aesthetic, but you also want something that moves beyond it, then Grayshade is what we're looking at. And the Grayshade Kickstarter is really hugely important, and you can read Grayshade for $1 via this campaign, $1. So that really makes it, I think, it's a good financial deal too, to be able to get this if you want to be able to read this work. So !Grayshade Chaos, please spread the word and support the Kickstarter if you haven't already. And for those who have, thank you so much. All right, that's going to do it for me. I want to thank my wonderful people who are always a part of this. Thank you to Arudinel. Thank you, of course, to Garlic Tofu, to Triffity Mats, Turbo Tango, the Rising Tides. Thank you to my wonderful mods, and particularly there, thank you to Mike and Brandon for being with me for this. Thank you so much for giving up part of your afternoons. Really appreciate it, my friends. Thank you to my subscribers and Patreon supporters, Rudnell, Garlic, Triffid. Thank you to Turbo Tango. Thank you to Mrs. Dunsel and Tren. Thank you so much for that. Thank you as well to my viewers. Thank you to Arctor. Thank you to Big Boss, DM Chromie. Thank you to Erica. Thank you to Jagtress, Lara Croft. Thank you to Loveless56 for the raid earlier today. I appreciate that. Thank you for Mexi. Thank you to Marinda. Thank you to Seji. Thank you to Cuberville. Thank you to Sophia Fox. Thank you to Tamashaka. Thank you to the Raging Eagle. Thank you to the Raven Rolls. I wonder if the Raven rolls because of the Raging Eagle. I wonder if that's the case. Thank you to TNS Mephiston. Thank you to you, Christensen. And thank you, of course, to Uncle Elias. Thank you so much. And you can be part of kickstarting a book trilogy. That's right. All those things are great. Good to see you, Uncle Elias. It's been a little while. I'm glad you're back. But good to see everybody. And again, if you can support the Grayshade Kickstarter, please do. I think it's a story that really matters and that we care about deeply on the team. So please consider supporting us there. Last but not least, Triffid, I'm going to be playing Solasta, the Lost Valley DLC. I'm going to be continuing with that. That's going to do it for me. Thank you, everybody, and I will catch you lovely folks very soon. Until then, as always, please be good to each other, and I'll catch you folks in about a half hour over on GOG. Thanks a lot to Mike and Brandon, and bye for now. honk.